Good evening, everyone, and welcome to The Proof is Out There. In the book of Exodus, God used a cloud to guide Moses and his people through the desert. But these days, people are talking about a different type of cloud control. Are aliens using clouds for cover? July 2015. Hector Garcia is hanging out in his neighborhood in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. He is enjoying the summer weather when he suddenly notices something bizarre floating in the sky above him.
It's a cloud with lights in it, moving weird.
The aerial object can best be described as a shape-shifting, semi-transparent cloud-like mass. It hovers and follows a set of power lines until it drifts out of sight behind homes. The cloud's seemingly guided behavior has led to Hector's video going viral, racking up over 1 million clicks on YouTube.
Some people looking at this see that inside this amorphous blob, there seem to be glowing or shimmering lights. And it looks like this object is intelligently going to a destination.
Now, at first, I figured this could just be some floating debris. After all, Aero, the Pentagon's UAP identification team, said that's just exactly what many sightings turn out to be. But look at those twinkling lights. Tidal says the object's behavior reminds her of an alleged ET phenomenon known as cloud cloaking.
This is the theory that a UFO will hide itself either within a cloud or mask itself to look like a cloud so that it can hover inobtrusively.
Some say that aliens use cloud cloaking for one primary reason.
The idea is that the UFOs aren't just using clouds as cover. They're cloaking themselves so they can observe us and gather data on us without our realizing it.
Believers point to examples like this video posted in 2016 of a cloud-shaped UFO that suddenly disappears. And Tidal adds that another decades-old photo could show this may not be the first time aliens have utilized this technique.
On November 17, 1974, H. Laursen of Viborg, Denmark, saw something strange in the sky.
Laursen took out his camera and captured this strangely shaped cloud that appears in the shape of a classic UFO, with almost tentacle-like appendages underneath it.
This caused some to wonder, is this actually a naturally occurring object or something alien cloaking itself to look natural? Ultimately, his sighting was investigated by the Danish Air Force, but no one could ever determine what exactly it was that he saw. Is this sighting in Philadelphia also something that we've just never seen in the sky before? Could this be definitive evidence of UFO cloud cloaking?
I've never seen no like that.
NASA's Earth Observatory estimates that nearly 2/3 of Earth's surface is covered by clouds at any given time. That's a whole lot of space for UFOs to be hiding in. But which one do we see in this video? UFO? Cloud? Both? Neither? Our experts are ready to clear things up. To begin, could this incident have simply been faked? Physicist Matthew Shadagas thinks the answer is not in what we see, but what we hear.
The eyewitness seemed pretty surprised and natural to me.
It's a cloud with lights in it.
So from their behavior, it's probably not a hoax, and it's probably someone who is genuinely surprised by what they are seeing.
So if what we're seeing is real, is it something that's supposed to be floating in the sky? Could it just be a cloud?
Initially, I thought this was a cloud off in the distance. But when clouds experience a lot of wind, they will disperse, oftentimes lose its shape. This is not what we saw here. It looks exactly the same at the end of the video as it does in the very beginning of the video.
If it's not a natural phenomenon like a cloud, could it be something found closer to Earth?
There's a dead giveaway moment right here where the object looks pretty close to a shopping bag, and I think I can make out what look like handles. And then, to me, that looks like a wind gust picking up and blowing a plastic bag.
And if it is, in fact, a plastic bag, Shadagas believes he can easily explain why it sparkles.
If it's something like a plastic bag, this could simply be light from the sun refracting in weird ways.
But watch as the object moves past the TV antenna and behind the houses. If it is a floating shopping bag, it would have to be an extraordinary and unusually large one. For Hernandez, the plastic bag explanation also doesn't make sense, especially given the weather conditions that day.
It's off in the distance, and within 10 seconds, it's right on us. So it might be moving at over 50 miles an hour, but the winds this specific day were fairly light. They were 5 to 10 miles an hour. It's a clear day, high pressure over the region. It just doesn't make sense with what we're looking at here.
But that doesn't mean Hernandez thinks this is alien cloud cloaking technology.
If there was an alien species that was trying to develop an object to blend in, they would obviously have to know that clouds don't look like this normally. If it's a UFO that is practicing cloaking, it's not doing a good job.
So if it's not a UFO, what is it?
Whatever this is, it's changing direction. It takes a nosedive, but before it reaches the ground, it goes horizontally. And this behavior leads me to believe that there is some control that something or someone has over this object. And I don't have an explanation to that. It remains unidentified.
Our verdict? This is a genuine UFO, though not necessarily the extraterrestrial kind. This object doesn't move like a cloud, and we're not exactly sure what it's made of or how it's staying aloft. This feels like one of those cases where you will need to step up and help us out. So if you know anything about this incident, please reach out. Now, let's move on to another favorite topic of ours, lake monsters. Forget Loch Ness. Legend has it that something monstrous is stirring at the bottom of Lake Superior. And forget legends. Thanks to modern technology, we may finally have actual evidence about what's going on down there. June 2022, Lake Superior, in between Michigan and Wisconsin. Fisherman Andrew Bisick is out on his boat with a group of friends using sonar to scan for the lake's catch of the day. Suddenly, Andrew spots something strange.
We were having a good time, and then this came across the screen, and I said, "Hey, everybody, come look at this."
A screen grab of Andrew's sonar shows a mysterious shape swimming at the bottom of the lake. You can see what appears to be a long neck and a small head connected to a cylindrical body with a long tail and a potential fin.
It looks like it's 60 or 80 feet long. First thing that jumped out at me is this kind of looks like the Loch Ness Monster.
Field researcher Ken Gerhardt is not one bit surprised that this image was found in Lake Superior.
In Lake Superior, there is a creature known as Pressy, named after the nearby Presque Island River. The physical descriptions are always very similar. A giant snake-like animal, about 75 feet in length, with a horse-like head, 2 distinct pectoral fins, snake-like tail, and perhaps most intimidating, a mouth rimmed with razor-sharp teeth.
Legends of Pressy stretch back to the late 1800s, but it wasn't until 1977 that someone was thought to have captured actual photographic evidence of the creature.
A gentleman was staying at the Presque Isle campground when he managed to catch a photograph of which he believed was Pressy. He said it had the girth of a Volkswagen Bug.
Perhaps the most striking evidence of Pressy's existence is 400 years old.
There are some intriguing pictographs that are painted at Lake Superior Provincial Park of this giant, strange, snake-like animals hovering under a canoe filled with 5 people. And according to the local Ojibwe tribe, there are actually legends of the strange serpentine animal that is said to snatch people off of boats and devour them.
Sonar evidence may be the key to discovering the truth behind legends of the world's lake creatures. Back in 2016, a sonar-equipped submersible drone captured images deep inside Loch Ness of what appeared to be the lake's infamous monster. Unfortunately, it ended up being a 30-foot model of Nessie made for a movie that sank in the 1970s. But could this image be proof that Lake Superior's Pressy does in fact exist? Our experts dive in. Many online doubters claim that this footage is showing nothing more than a large sturgeon fish. But biologist Floyd Hayes says that's highly improbable.
Sturgeons can grow really large. However, the largest sturgeons in the Great Lakes are only about 8 feet long. This thing here It would be too long to be a sturgeon.
So could this be some prehistoric creature like Pressy? Marine biologist Shay Steingast says the gigantic aquatic dinosaur known as the plesiosaur could have lived in this specific area once upon a time.
Plesiosaurs are known to have existed in North America. At first glance, this looks like it could be maybe a plesiosaur. I can see how you might interpret this as something like a head and a long neck with a body.
However, Steingast believes the truth behind this creature lies in the proper interpretation of how sonar captures images.
We can see that the supposed plesiosaur has different colors throughout the image, and those colors indicate density. If we were looking at a singular animal, all of that coloration would be red. Instead, what we're probably seeing are two dense areas of organisms, along with a weaker area of organisms that is that blue coloration.
So then, what exactly is it that Andrew found on his sonar?
What I think we're seeing here is maybe two separate schools of fish within a bed of lakeweed and a school of fish nearby with some other fish trailing off. And that would make a lot of sense biologically because fish tend to hang out in protected, vegetated areas within the Great Lakes. I think this might be a case where there is an apparent image that we're looking at that's really easy to misinterpret.
Our verdict? For better or worse, this image is showing us several schools of fish, not a plesiosaur like the infamous Pressy. And while that may be the case this time, the legend of Pressy certainly rages on as reported sightings continue. So keep your eyes and your sonar trained on those deep lake beds. When it comes to UFOs, observers typically see traits such as defying gravity without any visible means of propulsion, or abilities like instantaneous acceleration that physics can't explain. Now, we may have found something else to add to the list. Take a look. November 2022, Homestead, Florida. Dylan Thompson is taking a leisurely stroll through a parking lot when he sees something odd materializing in the night sky. He records this. A glittering trail of flaming light streams ominously from the heavens. Suddenly, it splits into 7 light trails that eventually morph into 9 orbs. Then, as you can see here, each orb suddenly halts its descent, seeming to float with purpose before fading out, one by one, into the night sky.
These lights do not look natural. This is some kind of technology, or there's something driving these lights.
The phenomenon seems to be eerily similar to another sighting we featured in an earlier proof episode of lights that appeared near Warminster, England. And the way these lights split up on descent reminds Tidal of an intriguing theory.
In 1949, engineer, physicist, and computer scientist John von Neumann introduced the world to his idea of universal assemblers. This is a type of UFO that is basically a self-replicating robot, and these robots can create more of themselves as they explore the universe.
Von Neumann's theory is that these probes explore the universe, mining essential raw materials from asteroids, moons, and planets. It's that mining which allows them to self-replicate, creating the ability for long-distance space travel.
These are sometimes called von Neumann probes, and they're said to replicate the way viruses or living organisms behave.
But Tidal notes that some believe there could be a more earthly, albeit ominous, explanation.
It's possible some would see this as evidence of some kind of preparation for space war.
A space war? Tidal says our military believes space could be the next battleground.
The media has widely reported that the Pentagon is preparing for a future space war, with nations like Russia and China launching increasing satellites that have weapons that can destroy communication satellites. The White House is proposing a $30 billion budget for the U.S. Space Force, which is $4 billion more than last year.
With deep pockets, is it possible that the U.S. Space Force is testing new offensive or defensive weapons designed to protect rockets at launch? Or could these lights be evidence of a von Neumann probe? Our experts have big thoughts on this one. Physicist Matthew Shadagis explores the von Neumann probe theory.
A bright streak seems to split into several streaks, all falling downwards. That behavior does seem to point towards some of the alleged cases of self-replicating UFOs.
But it's that slow downward trend that has Shadagis convinced we're likely looking at something more earthly than alien.
I don't see any sort of zigzaggy pattern that's associated with classic UFO cases. I do see a downward fall that is probably due to gravity, and that makes me think that there's probably a natural explanation.
Could the strange lights have anything to do with the big budget increases over at Space Force? Maybe Space Force was testing a new type of defensive weapon used to protect rockets from missile attack. Decoy pyrotechnic countermeasures have protected jet fighters for decades. Aviation expert Tim McMillan weighs in.
Countermeasures are employed as a means of thwarting missile targeting systems or systems that are targeting aircraft using infrared or thermal signatures. And the object behind that is to steer a missile away from the aircraft and into the flares. But it's not consistent with thermal countermeasures. The real big clue for me in this video is if you watch it, you'll notice that there appears to be aviation navigation lights of an aircraft.
McMillan says those lights and the location could be the keys to solving the mystery.
The Air Force Reserve Base in Homestead, Florida, happens to be the winter training facility for the U.S. Army's parachute team, the Golden Knights. They do exactly what I think we see here, which are pyrotechnic night jumps.
The Golden Knights consist of more than 100 elite skydivers who appear around the country to promote the U.S. Army. Watch closely as the single flare becomes multiple ones. That's each skydiver peeling off after jumping as a group.
And if you look at other pyrotechnic skydivers, this video is very similar to that.
The verdict? We're going with pyrotechnic skydivers. While we weren't able to confirm with the Golden Knights if they were jumping on this particular night, we agreed that McMillan's observations do seem to point to a fiery skydive display. These next photos have had the Bigfoot community intrigued for over 2 decades. And the content of the photos is strangely not the only thing that's got us scratching our heads. December 2000, Sarasota County, Florida. The Sarasota Sheriff's Department is going through their mail when they receive something bizarre from an anonymous source. A typed letter reads, "Enclosed, please find some pictures I took in late September or early October of 2000. My husband says he thinks it's an orangutan." The attached photos are terrifying, depicting an ape-like creature crouched behind foliage, its eyes glowing red. The author estimates the creature to be 6.5 to 7 feet tall while kneeling. As the letter continues, "Please find out where this animal came from. It shouldn't be loose like this. Someone will get hurt." The author's identity remains a mystery. Still, field researcher Cliff Barrickman believes we could be looking at some bona fide Bigfoot evidence.
I've seen a lot of purported Sasquatch photographs in my time, and this is one of the better ones because you can see a fair amount of detail, and it is just kind of creepy. All over the country, whenever Sasquatches are observed, people would call them a variety of local names. And in Florida, they started calling these animals skunk apes.
Rumored to have an aggressive stench like rotting meat or raw sewage, the infamous skunk ape has been the subject of numerous alleged encounters, like this 2015 footage shot in Tampa and this video filmed in the Everglades in 2000. We concluded both those videos were hoaxes. Still, accounts of Floridians running afoul of this creature go all the way back to the 1800s.
The earliest report that I could uncover comes from 1816, when a man reported seeing a man-sized monkey run off into the woods in Apalachicola, Florida. People have reported being stalked by them. I know of one witness that was up in his tree stand and he heard something coming at him, and when he looked down, there was one of these things crawling up the tree after him with red glowing eyes.
In fact, it's the red glowing eyes in these photos that lead many to believe they are proof of an authentic Sasquatch. Remember, many researchers believe this creature is distantly related to humans.
Many reports of Sasquatches at night are accompanied by red eye shine. And humans have a red reflectivity to their eye as well in photographs. The flash reflects off the retina, and that red shine is actually the blood vessels on the back of one's eye.
Outside of primates, most animals don't have that red shine because of reflective tissue behind their retinas called the tapetum lucidum. This tissue enables low light visibility for animals, and it's also the reason your cat's eyes might have a green or blue tint in photos at night.
People hold up these photographs as evidence of the red eye shine, and maybe they're right.
Investigators were able to verify that these photos were indeed developed in Sarasota County right around the time of the alleged incident. So we know at least the location and the time frame checkout, but what about this creature? Let's check in with our experts. The author of this strange letter suggests this creature is an orangutan, but anthropologist Kathy Strange says this is no such creature.
You can tell this isn't an orangutan because of the grayness in the hair. Orangs don't gray like that. Plus, their orangs are well known to be hairless on their face.
So could this be the infamous skunk ape? What about that red eye shine, commonly found in humans and primates?
For me, when I have my photo taken, only my pupils are red. It's not the entire eye. And in that photo, the entire eye is red. That tells me something else is going on.
Anatomist and Bigfoot expert Jeff Meldrum agrees that what we're seeing here isn't natural eye shine.
I could imagine an artificial eye with a smooth surface reflecting the flash from a camera. That might explain the appearance of the eye somehow self-illuminating.
Like an artificial eye, you might see in a mask with plastic eye lenses. And according to Meldrum, the legitimacy of these photos has been foiled by the foliage.
The biggest saw palmetto leaves are 3 feet across. So the most glaring inconsistency was the assertion that the figures that she encountered were 6.5 to 7 feet in height. Even if this was the largest saw palmetto leaf, it would make that figure only about 4 feet tall. So the credibility of the remainder of the letter is drawn into question.
Our verdict? We think that this is probably a hoax due to the strange letter and the odd aspects of the creature itself. That being said, no one has been able to find the costume or prop in these photos, and whoever orchestrated this whole thing has never come forward to claim credit. So there's still a possibility, however small, that the skunk ape is still out there somewhere. In the 1940s and 50s, the term flying saucer was practically synonymous with UFO. The acronym was coined around the same time. You're about to see one of the most famous photos ever taken of a flying saucer. And decades later, it is still raising some big questions. November 1951, Riverside, California. Guy Marquand Jr. and a couple of friends are taking in the scenic hillside when something in the sky breaks the stillness.
Marquand reported seeing this object flying extremely fast overhead. He ran to grab his camera, then took this snapshot.
The black and white photo could hardly make it any clearer. In the sky above a sloping hill soars a crisp-edged disc with a domed top and a high-contrast metallic sheen.
Of all the famous early UFO photographs, this has that classic flying saucer look. But really, flying saucer mania started 4 years earlier with pilot Kenneth Arnold in 1947.
In June of 1947, Arnold was flying near Mount Rainier in Washington when he witnessed something that would make UFO history.
He saw a bright flash to the northeast and looked over to see that it was 9 shining objects. He described these objects as kind of like pie plates or saucers. The media then took that description and coined the term flying saucer.
And with that, this new UFO craze took off.
In the months after Arnold's original sighting, more eyewitnesses saw something similar to what he described. Within months, 90% of the country knew and was familiar with the term flying saucer.
Among the many flying saucers and depictions that followed Arnold's came the Riverside UFO. The big difference? Unlike Arnold, Guy Marquand Jr. had actual photographic evidence. Flying saucers have kind of gone out of fashion. In 2023, the Pentagon's All-Domain Anomaly Resolution Office dubbed orbs the most common UFO shape among recent reports. In contrast, discs, or flying saucers, comprised only 2%. So were flying saucers ever real? And if so, why are we seeing different UFOs now? And the big question, is the photo legit? We turn first to astronomer Mark D'Antonio to ask, could a flying saucer even fly?
Here I am moving the UFO from one side to the other. It went from here to here. But what if I could make it disappear from here and just appear right here? Maybe they're disc-shaped because they're particle accelerators that allow them to pop out of our 4 dimensions and then pop back in.
Particle accelerators produce beams of electrically charged atomic or subatomic particles. They're often circular so the beams can travel in a continuous loop. And astrophotographer Andrew McCarthy says there's another reason the saucer might make a good spaceship.
The flying saucer shape could allow the craft to function as a centrifuge. So you could simulate whatever gravity your home planet had by spinning it faster or slower as it's traveling.
This is because a centrifuge creates a sustained rotational force that causes your body's inertia to press you against the sides, effectively simulating gravity. If you've ever ridden the Gravitron at an amusement park, then you've experienced this firsthand.
So the flying saucer may actually be an ideal interstellar vehicle.
But then why has the ideal interstellar vehicle apparently fallen out of favor?
It's possible that there are other types of interstellar craft that have reached us from various civilizations. We're seeing flying saucers less often, but it doesn't mean that there aren't these types of UFOs out there.
So is this flying saucer a genuine UFO or the result of some kind of trick photography?
When I analyze this photo, it actually appears to be reflecting it exactly as one would expect something metallic with that shape to be behaving in the sky like that. So whatever this is, it was captured authentically in camera.
Yet while McCarthy believes it's a real object, he's not so sure it can't be identified.
If you take a look at car styles at the time, you'll notice that they all had a common feature called the hubcap.
Metal hubcaps are less common now, but back when this photo was taken, these shiny wheel protectors were everywhere. They often had a raised part in the center, similar to the domed top we see on this alleged UFO.
The shape very strongly resembles this flying saucer. So I think that's a much more plausible explanation than saying we got visitors from outer space.
And D'Antonio sees that too.
When we look at this, it's on an angle compared to the camera. Usually, things that are traveling in an arc through the sky are things that are, say, tossed. Like a hubcap being thrown like a frisbee off of this rock right here, and someone took a picture of it.
Our verdict? Thrown metal hubcap. The light, the angle, and the car design of that era just make it the most likely explanation. We can't say for sure, but we think these fun-loving folks from the 50s might have been pulling a fast one in the heyday of the flying saucer craze. The 2007 horror film Paranormal Activity is about a young couple who set up cameras to document a supernatural presence haunting their home. But what if something similar actually happened in real life? Well, get ready for the jump scare. It's March 2022, just southwest of Minneapolis in Shakopee, Minnesota. At about 10 o'clock at night, Joey Radke is watching TV in the master bedroom of the home he's renting. But out in the hallway, something spooky is about to go down. A CCTV camera is rolling as 2 cats run into the home's darkened living room and freeze. One of the cats pounces and the other darts behind a laundry basket and stares at the spot where it just came from. The family's 3rd cat is nowhere to be seen. Then, 15 seconds later, a door closes and a shadowy figure appears to walk out of a room into the hall. Take a closer look. We used Luma and color effects to up the contrast and enhance the image. The shape looks like a woman in a dress with her hair puffed up on top of her head. The form is gone as quickly as it came, but now orbs are seen flying through the room. Joey finds the footage after his wife, who was out of town at the time, gets an alert on her phone.
My oldest stepson was kind of freeze framing it frame by frame. And when he captured it, we all jumped and said, you know, that's a woman standing in our hallway wearing a nightgown with that kind of bouffant, kind of beehive-ish hair.
Joey says he had long heard rumors that the home he rented may be haunted.
The friends of ours who own the home say that there was a previous homeowner before they lived there that ended up passing away in the master bedroom, and the neighbors said that it looked like the gal that did live there that did pass away.
Joey shares that before this incident was caught on camera, his wife had woken up several times late at night with the feeling that there was an eerie presence at the foot of the bed. And some believe the strange behavior of Joey's cats adds some weight to the idea that a spirit was present.
Cats sense what we don't sense. One of the most infamous cases of a precognitive cat is a cat by the name of Oscar. Now, Oscar was adopted by a nursing and rehabilitation center in Providence, Rhode Island. But Oscar had this uncanny ability to detect what would invariably be the death of a patient. He would get up on the bed and curl up, and the patient would pass away.
So can cats detect spirits, coming or departing? Some studies have found that cats actually do know more than humans. It's said they feel certain vibrations and can sense negativity coming from people. So let's have our experts channel their best feline intuition to unravel this spirited yarn. Catholic miracle researcher Michael O'Neill says the concept of ghosts does have a place in Catholic tradition.
There's this idea that the soul outlives the body. And Catholics also believe in purgatory, this space between living on earth and your final destination. The thought is that perhaps ghosts are those people who are souls in purgatory.
So is this the ghost of the former owner manifesting in her own purgatory? And does Joey's wife's experience of waking up to see a spirit reinforce that?
Perhaps we can attribute this to somebody being awoken from REM sleep and having a hallucination. Their brain is projecting images into their physical space, which makes them feel that it's actually real.
That may provide an explanation for why some people see ghosts, but this was a camera seeing it. So we went to forensic video analyst Mick West, and he has a theory on what's happening.
We know that they have 3 cats, which leads to the possibility that what we're actually seeing over here might just be a cat. We see something coming in, but all we're seeing really is just kind of a collection of pixels. It could well be that this is a cat. Perhaps this is its tail over here. We really don't know because the camera is really bad.
And West thinks that this low-resolution CCTV camera can explain why we have such a hard time identifying what's going on.
We see this little kind of jump in the video here. That's the video kind of updating itself, catching up with the compression. Videos are split into what's called I-frames and P-frames. I-frames are actual images, and P-frames are predicted images. That what the compression algorithm thinks is going to be in that particular image based on the previous frame. And I think what might have happened here, the cat walked into this room and then jumped up onto the top of whatever's here, a little shelf or a dresser or something.
Mystery solved? Not exactly. Joey says that theory might make sense, but in reality, it's physically impossible.
It's just an empty hallway. There's no shelves or anything where a cat would jump onto.
Our verdict? Unidentified, which is as close to saying it's a ghost as we're willing to go. West may be onto something with the theory that this is Joey's missing 3rd cat. But if that's the case, then what is it jumping onto? And what were those strange orbs we see flying through? If only the other 2 scaredy cats could talk. Mars has 2 moons, Deimos and Phobos, which were discovered way back in 1877. Phobos orbits Mars near its equator 3 times a day. It is so close to the planet's surface that it's not visible from some locations on Mars. But when it's caught on camera, what can be seen is something that's out of this world. September 12, 1998. The Mars Global Surveyor is 2 years into its mission to monitor Mars. It's above Phobos when its camera captures a surprising sight that amateur astronomer Efren Palermo then discovers on NASA's website.
I was looking through the images and kind of finding anomalies. That's when I saw something a little bit out of place.
Efren is looking at an enormous protrusion on the Mars moon's surface. You can tell from the shadow this thing is tall.
Phobos is a very small moon, and there's no geologic reason to have a structure sticking out like that.
This feature rises 300 feet into the sky, making it almost as tall as London's Big Ben. Author and lecturer Jason Martell says it seems to be cylindrical, with a slanted top, so many believe it can't be natural.
Many areologists have studied the idea that this could be some type of a monolith.
But this structure is as big as a building, so as strange as it seems, some people have speculated that it could be some type of futuristic dwelling. In fact, it looks a bit like Marcia, a 3D printed vertical home designed right here on Earth as a model for sustainable living on the red planet. Marcia's dual shell egg shape allows for the use of less material and balances the need for greater Earth-like atmospheric pressure inside, with Mars's thinner atmosphere outside.
The structure of these towers is taller and leaner in mass, making them ideal for climate conditions on Mars. Perhaps these structures are indicative of the intelligent design needed to create weather-resistant Martian structures.
Don't buy it? Well, there's an even more out there theory. This structure looks a bit like the plastic protected antennas on an old Nokia cell phone. So maybe it's an antenna or some other communication device attached to a larger spacecraft. That spacecraft being Phobos itself.
Soviet scientist Iosif Shklovsky concluded that Phobos was most likely hollow inside, with possibly a thin sheet of metal exterior. Originally thought to be an asteroid captured by Mars gravity, scientists thought that the drag from the atmosphere was causing Phobos to sink its orbit by almost 2 inches a year. And for that to happen, some said it had to be hollow, like a man-made artificial satellite.
Astronaut Buzz Aldrin thought the Phobos monolith would generate public curiosity when its existence became widely known. And he was right. We've got to ask, who or what put that there? Fortunately, we have some experts on hand to give us the lowdown on this Martian moon mystery. First, astrophotographer Andrew McCarthy speaks to whether the Phobos monolith could be an alien communication tower.
The irregular shape of this structure would make it difficult for communications as we understand it. The communications dishes we're familiar with would be symmetrical, with an antenna for omnidirectional transmitting and receiving.
McCarthy also suggests that Soviet scientist Iosif Shklovsky's idea that Phobos could be a hollowed-out spacecraft is, well, hollow, thanks to new info about Phobos and its twin moon, Deimos.
It's not that Shklovsky did bad science. It's that they had bad data to work with. Today, we're fairly certain they're completely solid and similar to many other asteroids out there.
And as far as this being a dwelling modeled on designs like Marcia,
it's just really coincidental that they have a similar shape to what the design is right now for Marcia, but it's definitely made up of rock material that's local to the region. You can see that it is a rock formation.
So then, what exactly is this Phobos monolith, and how did it get here?
Most likely, it's impact ejecta. It could have formed from an impact onto the surface of Phobos, but it also could be a meteorite that was heading towards the sun and intersected with Phobos, and what you're seeing is a piece of just laying there.
The night always began the same way in my memory, with a low electronic hum that could have been the vibration of studio lights or the echo of something much older buried beneath the earth. And it was under that sound that I first imagined the world of the proof is out there as a living organism rather than a television program, a creature that fed on doubt, curiosity, and the quiet desperation of people who wanted the universe to be stranger than their daily lives allowed, and so I shaped this story around a nameless narrator who walks into a control room where screens bloom like mechanical flowers, each one carrying a fragment of the impossible, A light streaking across a desert sky, a dark silhouette moving between trees too smoothly to be human, a metallic object resting in a farmer's field like an insect pretending to be stone, and the narrator senses immediately that nothing here is accidental, because every clip, every grainy photograph, every trembling eyewitness voice has already chosen him as much as he has chosen it, pulling him into a role that feels half investigator, half confessor, as if the act of asking whether something is real is itself a kind of ritual. He remembers the first case they discuss, a supposed UFO sighting captured by a security camera mounted above a rural gas station, the object appearing as a slow-moving orb that flickers between white and amber. And what fascinates him is not the light itself but the way the witnesses describe it as watching, a projection perhaps, yet one that repeats across cultures and decades, suggesting that the human mind is wired to interpret the unknown as sentient, and so the narrator begins to wonder whether the real disguise is not the UFO hiding as something mundane but the human need hiding as evidence, dressed up in pixels and timestamps. As the investigation unfolds, experts dissect the footage frame by frame, pointing out lens flares, insects passing close to the camera, drones misidentified as visitors from elsewhere, and the narrator listens with a mixture of relief and disappointment, because debunking offers safety while belief offers wonder, and the proof is out there thrives in that tension, never fully denying the extraordinary but insisting that extraordinary claims must survive the harsh light of analysis, a light as unforgiving as the desert sun under which another witness claims to have seen a craft settle silently onto the sand, leaving behind scorched earth and a lingering smell of ozone. The narrator travels there in his mind, feeling the grit under his boots, imagining the heat radiating from the ground, and he notices how the story changes depending on who tells it, the scorch marks shifting position, the craft's shape morphing from disc to triangle to something unnamed, and this fluidity becomes a theme, because reality in this world is not fixed but negotiated, constructed in the space between perception and proof. Then the focus shifts to the forest, where Sasquatch stories grow like moss on old trees, and the narrator recalls the iconic footage, the shaky film of a large, upright figure striding across a clearing, its gait both human and alien, and he feels a chill not because he believes without question but because the image has endured, resisting complete explanation despite decades of scrutiny. And here the show introduces biologists, primatologists, and skeptics who measure limb ratios and muscle movement, comparing them to known animals, while believers speak of encounters marked by fear and awe, of eyes glowing in the dark and a presence that feels intelligent yet unreachable. The narrator senses that Sasquatch, like the UFO, functions as a mirror, reflecting human anxieties about wilderness, evolution, and the possibility that we are not alone even on our own planet, and he begins to weave these cases together in his mind, seeing patterns where the show presents episodes, noticing how often the evidence hovers just on the edge of clarity, how often the truth seems to retreat as analysis advances, like a tide pulling secrets back into the deep. There is a moment when a piece of metal recovered from a crashed site is tested in a lab, its isotopic composition measured with meticulous care, and the results suggest a mundane origin, an ally common in industrial applications, and the narrator feels a strange gratitude toward the scientists, because their work grounds the narrative, preventing it from drifting into pure fantasy. Yet he also feels the loss of a dream, the quiet extinguishing of a possibility that once burned bright, and this emotional oscillation becomes the heartbeat of the story, a rhythm of hope and skepticism that mirrors the human condition itself. As the narrator continues, he reflects on how the proof is out there does not ridicule belief nor blindly endorse it, instead adopting a tone of respectful inquiry that invites viewers to participate in the investigation, to weigh evidence, to question assumptions, and to accept uncertainty as a legitimate outcome, and he realizes that this approach is what allows the show to function as modern folklore, a space where ancient myths are re-examined through contemporary tools, where campfire stories are subjected to forensic analysis without losing their power to inspire. He recalls an episode involving a supposed shape-shifting object captured on infrared camera, initially interpreted as a cloaked craft, later explained as atmospheric distortion combined with sensor limitations, and he notes how the explanation, while satisfying intellectually, does not fully dispel the sense of mystery, because understanding the mechanism does not erase the wonder of witnessing something unfamiliar, and this insight leads him to a broader meditation on disguise, the idea that phenomena labeled as UFOs or cryptids might be ordinary things seen through extraordinary circumstances, or extraordinary things filtered through ordinary minds, and that the true disguise may lie in our expectations. The narrator begins to question his own role, acknowledging that by telling this story he too participates in shaping perception, choosing which details to emphasize, which doubts to foreground, and which silences to leave intact, and he wonders whether absolute proof is even desirable, whether the human psyche needs these unresolved questions to remain engaged with the universe, to feel connected to something larger than itself. As the control room fades and the forest and desert blur together, he imagines a composite landscape where lights move silently above treetops and heavy footsteps leave impressions that fill with shadow, and in this imagined world, investigators walk a fine line between belief and disbelief, armed with cameras and skepticism, chasing truths that may never fully reveal themselves, and he senses that this pursuit, rather than any definitive answer, is the heart of the proof is out there, a testament to humanity's enduring curiosity. The part closes with the narrator standing metaphorically at a threshold, aware that every case opens onto another question, every explanation generates new doubt, and that the story he is telling will unfold not as a march towards certainty but as a spiral, circling the unknown again and again, each pass bringing a different perspective, a new disguise, a fresh hint of something just beyond reach, and he pauses there, inviting the listener to decide whether the journey itself is enough or whether they crave the impossible moment when the mask finally falls. Morning arrives not as light but as a shift in tone, a recalibration of attention, and the narrator senses it as he returns to the world of the proof is out there, where yesterday's mysteries have not been solved overnight but have instead deepened, settling into his thoughts like sediment in still water, and he begins part 2 by following a new thread that appears deceptively simple. A video sent in by a suburban family showing an object hovering above their backyard, perfectly still, its outline oddly geometric against the clouds, and what strikes him immediately is how ordinary the setting feels, the trimmed lawn, the plastic children's toys scattered near a fence, the sound of a dog barking in the background, because the extraordinary here does not emerge from deserts or forests but intrudes into domestic normalcy, suggesting that the unknown no longer lives only at the edges of civilization but presses against its windows. Experts analyze the footage, noting the lack of motion blur, the consistent size relative to background objects, the absence of audible propulsion, and the narrator observes how each technical term functions like a small incision, cutting away layers of wonder to reveal structure beneath, yet the object resists full reduction, because while it may resemble a weather balloon or experimental drone, its behavior does not align perfectly with either, and this imperfect fit becomes the space where speculation thrives, where belief stretches to fill the gap left by incomplete explanation. The narrator reflects on how the show handles this tension with care, refusing to sensationalize but also refusing to dismiss, and he realizes that this balance is itself a form of storytelling, one that trusts the audience to live with ambiguity, a rare demand in a media landscape obsessed with certainty. From the suburban sky, the narrative shifts back to the wilderness, to a new Sasquatch encounter reported by hikers who claim to have heard vocalizations echoing through a mountain valley, sounds described as both animalistic and strangely patterned, and the narrator lingers on the audio analysis, the way frequencies are mapped, compared to known species, filtered for echoes and human interference, and he is fascinated by how sound, more than sight, seems to carry emotional weight, because hearing something unseen triggers a primal response, an awareness of vulnerability that visuals sometimes lack, as scientists debate whether the calls could belong to elk, bears, or even humans playing tricks. The narrator notes how the hiker's fear is treated as data rather than evidence, acknowledged but not validated as proof, and this distinction becomes important, because it underscores the show's commitment to separating subjective experience from objective analysis without invalidating either. He then considers how Sasquatch functions culturally as a liminal figure, occupying the boundary between human and animal, civilization and wilderness, known and unknown, and how this liminality mirrors the show's own position, standing between entertainment and investigation, myth and method. The story grows more complex when a piece of thermal footage is introduced, showing a large heat signature moving through dense forests at night, its shape inconsistent with known wildlife in the region, and the narrator feels a flicker of excitement tempered by caution, because thermal imaging has its own limitations, distortions caused by foliage, terrain, and angle, yet even with these caveats, the image lingers, a ghostly silhouette that refuses to be neatly categorized, and he wonders whether the persistence of such images speaks less to their accuracy and more to humanity's enduring fascination with what might be hiding just beyond the reach of our instruments. The narrative then loops back to aerial phenomena, this time involving historical cases, declassified military encounters where pilots describe objects outperforming known aircraft, accelerating and maneuvering in ways that defy conventional physics, and the narrator is struck by how authority complicates skepticism, because when trained observers report anomalies, the instinct to dismiss weakens, yet the show maintains its discipline, contextualizing these reports within the limitations of senses, human perception under stress, and the possibility of advanced but terrestrial technology. He reflects on how the proof is out there avoids the trap of conspiracy by emphasizing process over conclusion, showing how investigations unfold rather than jumping to grand narratives, and he senses that this approach subtly empowers viewers, encouraging them to think critically rather than passively consume claims. As Part 2 unfolds, the narrator becomes increasingly aware of a metastory, a pattern in which each case, regardless of outcome, reinforces a central idea, that proof is not a single object or moment but a convergence of evidence, interpretation, and context, and that even then, certainty remains elusive. He recalls an episode involving supposed alien implants, small metallic fragments removed from patients who believe they were abducted, and he watches as laboratory analysis reveals common materials, shards of glass or metal consistent with environmental exposure, and while the scientific explanation is clear, the narrator cannot ignore the psychological dimension, the sincerity of the individuals involved, their conviction that something extraordinary happened to them, and he considers how belief can shape memory, how trauma, sleep paralysis, and cultural narratives can intertwine to produce experiences that feel utterly real to those who live them. This realization leads him to a broader contemplation of disguise, not as deception but as translation, the way the unknown is filtered through the familiar, taking forms that align with existing myths and expectations, whether that be spacecraft, hairy giants, or shadowy figures at the edge of vision. The narrator begins to see the proof is out there as a map of these translations, charting how raw phenomena become stories, how stories become evidence, and how evidence is challenged and refined, and he is struck by the humility embedded in this process, the acknowledgement that human understanding is provisional, always subject to revision. The pace quickens as multiple cases are interwoven, a montage of lights, sounds, footprints, and data points, and the narrator feels both exhilarated and overwhelmed, mirroring the experience of modern life where information flows faster than comprehension, and he wonders whether the proliferation of cameras and sensors has brought us closer to truth or simply multiplied our uncertainties. There is a moment of quiet when an investigator admits on screen that not knowing is sometimes the most honest conclusion, and this statement resonates deeply with the narrator, because it reframes ignorance not as failure but as integrity, a refusal to pretend certainty where none exists. He thinks about how this ethos contrasts sharply with the absolutism often found in discussions of the paranormal, where belief and disbelief harden into identities, and he appreciates how the show carves out a middle space, one that values curiosity over conviction. As Part 2 draws toward its end, the narrator imagines standing again in the control room, surrounded by screens that now feel less like windows and more like mirrors, reflecting humanity's endless quest to understand its place in the cosmos, and he recognizes that the true subject of the proof is out there may not be UFOs or Sasquatch at all but the process of inquiry itself, the disciplined yet imaginative effort to make sense of a world that continually surprises us. He pauses on this thought, aware that the journey is only beginning, that each answer will give rise to new questions, each debunking to new theories, and that the line between disguise and revelation will remain blurred, inviting further exploration, deeper reflection, and continued engagement with the mysteries that refuse to stay neatly categorized. If Part 2 was about the spread of mystery into everyday spaces, Part 3 becomes an excavation, a deliberate descent into the layers beneath the images, and the narrator feels this shift immediately as the tone of the proof is out there grows heavier, more introspective, as if the show itself has decided to pause and look inward, not at the sky or the forest but at the machinery of belief that interprets them. And he frames this section around a case that at first seems almost trivial, a series of photographs showing strange symbols burned into the ground of a remote field, circular patterns intersected by straight lines, reminiscent of crop circles yet smaller, rougher, less theatrical, and what intrigues him is not the symbols themselves but the speed with which explanations multiply, from pranksters to natural phenomena to messages from non-human intelligence, each theory revealing more about the theorist than the evidence. Experts arrive, measuring soil compression, analyzing plant damage, testing for chemical residues, and the narrator watches how the scientific method proceeds patiently, stripping away assumptions, while online forums explode with certainty, and this contrast becomes central to his meditation, because it illustrates a cultural impatience with process, a hunger for answers that bypass the uncomfortable middle ground of uncertainty. As the investigation reveals inconsistencies suggesting human involvement, the narrator feels a familiar mix of disappointment and relief, but he also notes how the debunking does not erase the image's power, because the symbol has already done its work, igniting imagination, inspiring fear or hope, and embedding itself in the collective mind, and he realizes that evidence can be disproven while its emotional impact persists, lingering like a ghost after the lights come on. From these markings on the earth, the narrative pivots to the sky once more, this time focusing on a cluster of sightings reported over a coastal region, where witnesses describe objects emerging from the ocean before ascending rapidly into the clouds, and the narrator is struck by the archetypal resonance of this imagery, the ancient fear and fascination with the sea as a place of hidden depths and unknown life, now merged with modern anxieties about surveillance, technology, and intrusion, and he senses that these sightings tap into something primal, a feeling that the world beneath and above us is more populated than we assume. Naval experts analyze radar data, pointing out how reflections, atmospheric conditions, and instrument limitations can create the illusion of impossible movement, and yet some anomalies remain, small discrepancies that resist tidy explanation, and the narrator observes how the show handles these gaps not as proof of the extraordinary but as invitations to further inquiry, resisting the urge to fill them with speculation. He then turns to a deeply personal story featured in the series. That of a man who claims repeated encounters with a tall, shadowy figure near his rural home, a figure often associated with modern folklore as a harbinger or observer, and the narrator listens carefully to the man's testimony, noting the sincerity, the consistency, the way fear and familiarity intertwine, and he reflects on how the proof is out there approaches such accounts with empathy without surrendering rigor, bringing in psychologists to discuss pattern recognition, sleep-related hallucinations, and the human tendency to anthropomorphize ambiguous stimuli, and this balanced treatment resonates with him because it acknowledges the reality of the experience without endorsing a supernatural explanation. As the story unfolds, the narrator becomes increasingly aware of how modern technology both fuels and constrains mystery, because cameras, sensors, and analytical tools promise clarity yet often deliver ambiguity, producing data that requires interpretation, and interpretation is always colored by expectation, and he thinks about how earlier generations filled the unknown with gods and spirits, while contemporary culture fills it with extraterrestrials and cryptids. Different masks for the same fundamental uncertainty. The episode shifts again, introducing archival footage from the mid-20th century, grainy film reels showing lights in the sky, military briefings, and solemn officials discussing unidentified phenomena, and the narrator is fascinated by the continuity. The way these images echo modern sightings despite vast technological change, suggesting that while our tools evolve, our questions remain remarkably consistent, and he contemplates whether this continuity indicates an external reality persisting through time or an internal narrative endlessly reinterpreted. Experts contextualize the archival material, explaining experimental aircraft, Cold War secrecy, and the psychological climate of the era, and the narrator appreciates how history itself becomes a form of evidence, reminding viewers that mystery does not exist in a vacuum but is shaped by politics, fear, and cultural imagination. There is a particularly striking moment when a physicist explains how human intuition struggles with scale and speed, how objects moving at great distances can appear to behave impossibly, and the narrator lingers on this explanation, because it reframes many sightings not as failures of reality but as failures of perception, and he wonders how many mysteries persist simply because they occur at the edges of human sensory capability. The focus then turns back to Sasquatch, but this time through the lens of ecology, with scientists discussing the improbability of a large, unknown primate sustaining a breeding population without leaving more definitive evidence, and the narrator feels the weight of this argument, its quiet insistence on biological reality, yet he also notes how the discussion does not fully extinguish belief, because belief adapts, shifting toward ideas of transcendent populations, interdimensional beings, or intelligent avoidance of humans, and he recognizes this adaptability as both a strength and a weakness, a testament to imagination and a challenge to falsifiability. He reflects on how the proof is out there subtly educates viewers in critical thinking by exposing these adaptive narratives, showing how claims evolve in response to counter-evidence, and he sees this as one of the show's greatest contributions, a form of media literacy disguised as paranormal investigation. As Part 3 deepens, the narrator begins to feel a quiet unease, not because of the phenomena themselves but because of what they reveal about the human need for meaning, the desire to believe that someone or something is watching, guiding, or at least acknowledging us, and he wonders whether the persistence of UFOs and cryptids reflects a modern loneliness, a sense of isolation in a vast universe that science has stripped of comforting certainties. An episode featuring alleged time slips, moments where individuals claim to have briefly entered another era, further complicates this theme, and the narrator listens as physicists explain memory distortion, neurological phenomena, and the unreliability of eyewitness accounts, yet he cannot dismiss the emotional resonance of these stories, the longing they express for connection to the past or escape from the present, and he realizes that many mysteries function as psychological coping mechanisms, narratives that allow individuals to externalize confusion, trauma, or dissatisfaction. The show does not moralize this impulse, instead presenting it as a human constant, and the narrator appreciates this restraint, this refusal to reduce belief to stupidity or gullibility. As multiple cases intersect, he notices how often water, darkness, and liminal spaces recur, coastlines, forests at dusk, rural roads at night, places where boundaries blur and orientation falters, and he interprets this pattern as symbolic, suggesting that mystery thrives where perception is compromised, where the mind fills gaps left by incomplete information. The narrator then steps back, almost breaking the fourth wall of his own story, to consider his role as observer and storyteller, acknowledging that by selecting which cases to emphasize, which details to linger on, he too shapes meaning, and he questions whether any account of the proof is out there can be truly neutral, or whether neutrality itself is an illusion. This self-awareness becomes a turning point, because it reframes the narrative not as a quest for definitive answers but as an exploration of epistemology, the study of how we know what we know, and he realizes that the show's true subject may be knowledge itself, its limits, its vulnerabilities, and its power. As Part 3 approaches its conclusion, the narrator imagines all the evidence laid out on a vast table: photographs, audio recordings, lab reports, eyewitness statements, each piece precise yet incomplete, and he sees how none of them alone can support the weight of certainty, but together they form a mosaic of human curiosity, fear, and wonder, and he feels a quiet respect for this mosaic, flawed yet earnest. He ends this section with a sense of suspension rather than resolution, aware that the deeper one digs, the more complex the ground becomes, and that the act of questioning, when done honestly, does not lead to comfort but to humility, and it is in this humility, he suspects, that the real proof may reside, not proof of aliens or hidden creatures, but proof of a species endlessly striving to understand a reality that remains just slightly out of focus, always hinting at something more, always inviting another look, another question, another step into the unknown. Part 4 opens with a subtle but decisive shift in rhythm, as though the proof is out there itself has inhaled and chosen to slow its pulse, inviting the narrator to linger longer on fewer cases, to examine not only what is seen but how seeing itself changes the observer, and he begins with a phenomenon that feels almost deliberately understated. A sequence of still photographs taken by a commercial pilot through the cockpit window, showing a faint, elongated shape pacing the aircraft at cruising altitude, its outline blurred yet persistent across multiple frames, and what draws the narrator in is not the object's ambiguity but the pilot's restraint, the calm precision with which he recounts the event, noting speed, distance, and duration without embellishment, and this professional detachment complicates the usual narrative, because it deprives skepticism of its easiest weapon, emotional exaggeration. Analysts scrutinize the images, discussing parallax effects, ice crystals, reflections from cockpit glass, and the narrator feels the familiar oscillation between plausibility and doubt, yet he also senses something deeper at work, a moment where expertise confronts uncertainty and must admit the limits of its own explanatory power, not as surrender but as intellectual honesty. From the cockpit, the story descends metaphorically to the ground, to a rural community where residents report repeated sightings of a towering figure at the edge of farmland, a figure described with variations that nevertheless converge on certain constants: height, broad shoulders, deliberate movement, and the narrator recognizes how repetition lends weight to testimony without transforming it into proof, because consistency can arise from shared storytelling as easily as shared experience, and the show carefully navigates this terrain, mapping witness accounts against geography, time of day, and environmental conditions, revealing patterns that suggest both coordination and coincidence. Biologists weigh in, discussing misidentification of bears or humans, while sociologists note how expectation shapes perception, especially in communities already primed by local legend, and the narrator finds himself fascinated by this interdisciplinary convergence, the way multiple forms of knowledge intersect around a single question, none sufficient alone, all necessary together. The narrative then introduces an unsettling case involving electronic interference, where drivers on a remote highway report vehicles stalling simultaneously as a bright object passes overhead, lights flickering, radios filling with static, and the narrator is struck by the tactile quality of these reports, the smell of overheated engines, the metallic taste of fear, the sudden silence when machines fail, because technology, often our shield against the unknown, here becomes its amplifier. Engineers analyze the feasibility of electromagnetic pulses, solar activity, and infrastructure failure, offering plausible scenarios that nevertheless fail to account for every detail, and the narrator reflects on how modern mystery often manifests through technology, not in spite of it, revealing vulnerabilities we prefer not to acknowledge. As Part 4 deepens, the narrator becomes increasingly aware of how the proof is out there constructs time, alternating between present-day investigations and historical echoes, and he lingers on a segment examining medieval accounts of strange lights in the sky, luminous wheels, fiery spheres, and silent craft described in language shaped by a pre-scientific worldview, and he is struck by how familiar these descriptions feel despite their antiquity, suggesting either a continuity of external phenomena or a continuity of internal interpretation, and he notes how historians contextualize these accounts within religious symbolism and social upheaval, reminding viewers that mystery is always filtered through the concerns of its era. The show resists drawing a straight line from past to present, instead inviting viewers to hold multiple possibilities simultaneously, and the narrator appreciates this restraint, sensing that it honors complexity rather than exploiting coincidence. The focus returns to the present with a case involving alleged animal mutilations, a topic heavy with implication and fear, and the narrator watches as veterinary experts dismantle sensational claims, explaining scavenger behavior, post-mortem changes, and environmental factors, and he feels a sobering clarity emerge, because here the evidence strongly favors natural explanations, yet he also observes how the emotional residue persists, the unease provoked by images of loss and violation, and he realizes that some mysteries endure not because they are unresolved but because they touch deep anxieties about safety, control, and the fragility of order. This insight leads him to a broader meditation on fear as a narrative engine, how fear sharpens attention, intensifies memory, and accelerates belief, and how the proof is out there attempts to modulate fear without dismissing it, a delicate balance that requires both empathy and discipline. Midway through Part 4, the narrator encounters a case that unsettles him more quietly, involving a series of disappearances in a national park, initially framed by some as evidence of unknown predators or portals, and he follows as investigators methodically reconstruct timelines, terrain challenges, and human error, revealing how wilderness itself can be deceptive, how vastness and isolation conspire against survival, and he feels a somber respect for this analysis, because it confronts tragedy without mythologizing it, and yet he also understands why myth emerges here, because myth offers meaning where randomness feels intolerable. Psychologists discuss the human tendency to impose narrative coherence on chaotic events, and the narrator recognizes himself in this impulse, acknowledging that storytelling is both his tool and his temptation, capable of illuminating truth and obscuring it. The narrative then pivots to a technologically sophisticated case involving satellite imagery that appears to show a massive structure beneath polar ice, its geometric regularity fueling speculation, and the narrator is drawn to the scale of this mystery, the way it invokes hidden civilizations and suppressed knowledge, and he watches as geologists explain glacier movement, pareidolia, and data artifacts, gradually dissolving the structure into natural formations, and he feels a complex reaction: relief at the return of order, disappointment at the loss of wonder, and admiration for the patience required to let evidence speak even when it undermines excitement. He reflects on how the proof is out there repeatedly stages this emotional arc, not to manipulate but to educate, guiding viewers through the experience of curiosity disciplined by analysis, and he senses that over time, this repeated exposure reshapes perception, training audiences to tolerate uncertainty and revise beliefs. As the cases accumulate, the narrator begins to notice a thematic undercurrent centered on disguise, not as deliberate deception by unknown forces but as a byproduct of complexity, the way light disguises distance, sound disguises source, memory disguises accuracy, and expectation disguises ambiguity as certainty, and he realizes that the show's title operates on multiple levels, because proof is not simply out there waiting to be found but emerges through interaction, through methods that can reveal or conceal depending on how they are applied. A particularly reflective segment features investigators discussing cases that remain officially unexplained, not because they defy all explanation but because available data is insufficient, and the narrator is struck by the humility of this admission, the willingness to leave questions open rather than fill them with speculation, and he contrasts this with the cultural discomfort surrounding unanswered questions, the pressure to conclude, to resolve, to declare victory or defeat. This discomfort becomes a focal point as Part 4 nears its end, and the narrator turns inward, examining his own responses, noting how he feels more unsettled by ambiguity than by debunking or belief, because ambiguity resists closure, demanding ongoing engagement, and he wonders whether this is why mysteries persist across generations, because they offer a form of continuity, a conversation between past, present, and future observers. He imagines viewers watching The Proof Is Out There late at night, screens glowing in dark rooms, their minds oscillating between skepticism and awe, and he senses a quiet solidarity in this shared experience, a collective willingness to question without demanding immediate answers. The final moments of Part 4 settle into a contemplative stillness, as the narrator envisions the world as a layered palimpsest of explanations, some erased, some rewritten, some enduring, and he acknowledges that every investigation leaves traces, not only in data archives but in the minds of those who witness it, shaping how they interpret the next anomaly, the next story, the next whisper of something beyond the ordinary. He concludes with the recognition that The Proof Is Out There does not promise revelation but offers orientation, a way to navigate mystery without surrendering reason or wonder, and he pauses at this threshold, aware that deeper questions await, questions about consciousness, reality, and the limits of knowledge itself, and he invites the listener to step forward with him, into the next layer of inquiry, where the disguises grow subtler and the distinctions between observer and observed begin to blur even further. Part 5 unfolds with an almost imperceptible tightening of focus, as though the narrative lens narrows while simultaneously deepening, and the narrator senses that the proof is out there is no longer merely cataloging anomalies but beginning to interrogate the cause of pursuing them, the psychological, cultural, and even ethical weight carried by the act of investigation itself, and he introduces this section through a case that appears deceptively technical, a series of radar anomalies recorded over several nights near a major metropolitan area, blips that appear and vanish without consistent trajectory, sometimes splitting, sometimes merging, behaving in ways that challenge conventional air traffic logic, and what immediately captures the narrator's attention is the reaction of those tasked with monitoring the skies, not panic but quiet unease. The kind that arises when systems designed to impose order begin to behave unpredictably. Aviation specialists dissect the data, pointing to software glitches, signal interference, and overlapping returns from civilian and military sources, yet the anomalies resist full reconciliation, leaving behind a residue of doubt that the narrator finds more unsettling than any dramatic sighting, because it suggests that even our most trusted instruments can lie to us, not maliciously, but through complexity we only partially understand. From the abstract realm of radar, the story pivots sharply to the intimate, to a family living on the outskirts of a small town who report nightly disturbances, lights moving silently beyond their property line, animals agitated, a persistent sense of being watched, and the narrator is careful to note how The Proof Is Out There frames this account, foregrounding routine details, work schedules, weather patterns, domestic rhythms, grounding the extraordinary within the fabric of ordinary life, and this grounding makes the story more unsettling, because it denies viewers the comfort of distance. Investigators install cameras and sensors, capturing ambiguous flashes and sounds that resist clear interpretation, and the narrator reflects on how surveillance, intended to clarify, often multiplies mystery, producing more data points than certainty, and he senses a subtle critique here. A suggestion that the modern obsession with recording everything may be driven less by a desire for truth than by a fear of missing something transformative. Psychologists analyze the family's experience, discussing stress, expectation, and environmental factors, and the narrator appreciates how the show refuses to pathologize belief, instead situating it within a complex web of influences, acknowledging that fear and perception are not failures of reason but features of human cognition. As Part 5 progresses, the narrative introduces a case involving supposed humanoid figures captured on trail cameras, images that show elongated shapes standing upright, eyes reflecting light, bodies partially obscured by foliage, and the narrator feels the familiar pull of recognition, because these images echo countless others circulating online, yet he also notes how The Proof Is Out There slows the viewer down, comparing frames, overlaying skeletal models, demonstrating how deer, bears, and even humans can appear radically distorted when captured at specific angles, and he recognizes this as an act of demystification that does not humiliate belief but contextualizes it, offering understanding rather than ridicule. This leads him to reflect on the ethics of exposure, how viral mysteries often exploit fear and wonder for attention, while responsible investigation requires patience, humility, and a willingness to disappoint. The show then broadens its scope, examining how cultural narratives influence the interpretation of unexplained phenomena, featuring anthropologists who discuss regional variations in cryptid sightings, noting how similar experiences are labeled differently depending on local folklore, and the narrator is struck by the implication that the unknown does not arrive as a blank slate but is immediately clothed in familiar symbols, suggesting that this skies may be less about concealment by the phenomenon and more about projection by the observer. This insight resonates deeply, prompting the narrator to consider how UFOs themselves have evolved in popular imagination, shifting from metallic discs to luminous orbs to abstract shapes, mirroring technological and cultural change. And he wonders whether the form of the mystery tells us more about ourselves than about any external reality. Midway through Part 5, the narrative introduces a quietly haunting segment on missing time, individuals who report unexplained gaps in memory associated with strange lights or encounters, and the narrator listens as neurologists explain dissociation, microsleeps, and stress-induced amnesia, offering grounded explanations that nevertheless fail to capture the emotional weight of these experiences, and he is struck by how memory, often treated as evidence, is revealed here as a fragile, reconstructive process, susceptible to suggestion and reinterpretation, and this fragility complicates any investigation that relies heavily on testimony. The show treats these individuals with care, avoiding sensational reenactments, and the narrator senses a growing ethical awareness, an understanding that the pursuit of mystery must not come at the expense of human dignity. The pace shifts again as a team of scientists examines alleged anomalous materials recovered from various sites, fragments claimed to be non-terrestrial, and the narrator watches as spectroscopy and metallurgical analysis reveal common origins, industrial byproducts, natural alloys, and he feels a familiar cycle of anticipation and deflation, yet he also notes how each analysis reinforces trust in method, demonstrating that extraordinary claims are not dismissed out of hand but subjected to rigorous testing, and he realizes that this process itself is a form of respect, taking claims seriously enough to investigate them thoroughly. As these cases accumulate, the narrator begins to sense an undercurrent of fatigue, not only among investigators but within the cultural imagination, a weariness born of endless mystery without resolution, and he considers whether the constant search for the extraordinary may reflect a dissatisfaction with the ordinary, a craving for rupture in a world that often feels overexplained yet emotionally opaque. The Proof is Out There addresses this indirectly through a segment on hoaxes, deliberate fabrications created to deceive or entertain, and the narrator finds this examination unexpectedly poignant, because it reveals how some individuals manufacture mystery not for malice but for connection, recognition, or play, and he reflects on how hoaxes exploit the same cognitive vulnerabilities as genuine anomalies, blurring the line between belief and skepticism even further. Experts demonstrate how hoaxes are constructed and detected, offering viewers tools to evaluate claims critically, and the narrator recognizes this as an act of empowerment, reinforcing the show's educational dimension. As Part 5 deepens, the narrator becomes increasingly reflective, turning his attention to the cumulative impact of exposure to mystery, how repeated engagement with unexplained phenomena can recalibrate one's sense of reality, making the world feel simultaneously richer and more uncertain, and he acknowledges a subtle shift within himself, a growing comfort with ambiguity, a reduced need for definitive answers, and he wonders whether this is the show's most profound effect, not proving or disproving the unknown but reshaping the viewer's relationship to it. A particularly striking moment comes when an investigator admits on camera that some cases will never be resolved, not because the answers are inaccessible but because the questions themselves are flawed, based on assumptions that may need re-evaluation, and the narrator lingers on this admission, recognizing it as a call for epistemic humility, a reminder that inquiry requires not only better data but better questions. As the narrative approaches its close, the narrator weaves together the threads of technology, belief, memory, and culture, seeing how each functions as both tool and filter, revealing and obscuring in equal measure, and he returns to the theme of disguise, now understanding it less as a mask worn by the unknown and more as a byproduct of human perception, the inevitable distortion introduced whenever finite minds confront infinite complexity. He imagines the anomalies featured in the proof is out there not as isolated events but as signals in a noisy system, meaningful yet difficult to decode, and he senses that the true challenge lies not in identifying each signal's source but in learning how to listen without imposing premature narratives. The final movement of Part 5 is quiet, introspective, as the narrator considers the emotional landscape of those who dedicate their lives to investigation, the balance between wonder and skepticism, hope and restraint, and he feels a deep respect for this balancing act, recognizing it as a form of courage, the courage to remain open without becoming credulous, to doubt without becoming dismissive. He concludes by acknowledging that the journey is entering a more abstract phase, one where the questions grow less about objects in the sky or figures in the forest and more about perception, consciousness, and meaning, and he stands again at a threshold, aware that the next steps will require not sharper eyes but deeper reflection, and he pauses there, inviting continuation, knowing that the path forward will challenge assumptions even further, drawing the inquiry closer to its most unsettling realization, that the greatest mystery may not be what is out there, but how we choose to understand it. Part 6 begins with a perceptible deepening of gravity, as if the proof is out there has crossed an invisible line where curiosity gives way to consequence, and the narrator senses that the questions are no longer confined to what people see or record, but extend to how persistent exposure to mystery reshapes identity, belief, and even the architecture of trust in modern society. And he frames this chapter around a case that initially appears spectacular but gradually reveals itself as profoundly unsettling, a prolonged wave of coordinated sightings reported across multiple regions within a narrow time frame, involving luminous objects exhibiting similar behavior despite vast geographic separation, and what troubles the narrator is not the objects themselves but the synchronization of perception, the way stories emerge almost simultaneously, echoing one another in language, imagery, and emotional tone, suggesting a complex interplay between experience, media dissemination, and expectation. Analysts examine timestamps, weather patterns, satellite trajectories, and social media timelines, revealing how information spreads faster than verification, and the narrator reflects on how the velocity of modern communication compresses distance, making isolated events feel collective, and collective events feel orchestrated, even when they are not. And he begins to wonder whether the true anomaly lies not in the sky but in the network human mind, now capable of amplifying coincidence into apparent design. The narrative then shifts to a quieter but more intimate mystery. A former military technician who claims to have worked with classified sensor data describing objects that never appeared on public radar systems, and the narrator listens carefully to the measured cadence of this testimony, aware of how authority lends weight even as secrecy complicates verification, and the proof is out there responds with restraint, contextualizing the claims within known compartmentalization practices, technological limitations, and the psychology of memory shaped by high-stress environments, and the narrator appreciates this approach, recognizing that it neither dismisses the witness nor elevates him to profit, but situates him within a system where truth is fragmented by design. This fragmentation becomes a central theme as the chapter progresses, with experts discussing how modern institutions, military, scientific, governmental, are structured around partial knowledge, where no single individual possesses the whole picture, and the narrator considers how this reality fuels suspicion, because gaps in information invite speculation, and speculation, left unchecked, hardens into belief. The story then pivots to an unsettling case involving mass misidentification, where hundreds of witnesses report seeing a massive triangular craft hovering silently over a city, an event later correlated with a combination of drone displays, atmospheric conditions, and perspective distortion, and the narrator is struck by how convincing the collective memory remains even after explanation, because shared experience reinforces confidence, and he reflects on how consensus, often treated as validation, can instead function as a multiplier of error, a phenomenon deeply uncomfortable in a society that equates majority agreement with truth. Psychologists unpack this dynamic, explaining social reinforcement, memory convergence, and narrative contagion, and the narrator recognizes these processes at work not only in paranormal belief but in politics, culture, and identity, and he realizes that the proof is out there is quietly gesturing toward a much broader inquiry into how reality itself is socially constructed. As Part 6 unfolds, the focus turns inward, examining the investigators themselves, featuring candid discussions about burnout, doubt, and the emotional toll of sustained exposure to unresolved cases, and the narrator finds these moments unexpectedly revealing, because they strip away the illusion of the neutral observer, exposing investigators as participants shaped by the very mysteries they study, and he reflects on how repeated encounters with ambiguity can erode certainty, not only about the unknown but about one's own judgments, leading to a form of epistemic fatigue where the desire for answers competes with the need for psychological stability. A particularly striking segment explores how prolonged belief in unseen forces can alter behavior, relationships, and worldview, and the narrator listens as experts discuss how individuals who feel persistently observed, whether by extraterrestrials, cryptids, or abstract forces, may experience heightened vigilance, anxiety, or altered perception, and he appreciates how the show navigates this territory carefully, avoiding stigmatization while acknowledging genuine risk, reinforcing the idea that mystery, while compelling, carries responsibility. The narrative then introduces a case involving alleged underwater anomalies, sonar readings suggesting large, fast-moving objects beneath the ocean surface, and the narrator is drawn to the symbolic weight of the deep sea, humanity's least explored frontier, a place where ignorance is not metaphorical but literal, and he watches as marine scientists explain how sound behaves unpredictably underwater, how temperature layers, currents, and biological activity can produce deceptive readings. And yet he senses that even these explanations feel provisional, because the ocean's vastness resists comprehensive mapping, and he contemplates how some mysteries endure simply because their environments defy complete observation. This realization prompts a reflection on scale, how the human mind struggles to comprehend extremes of size, distance, and duration, and how this cognitive limitation creates fertile ground for misinterpretation, and the narrator recognizes that UFOs and cryptids often occupy these extremes, appearing fleetingly, distantly, or partially, ensuring that perception remains incomplete. Midway through Part 6, the show examines a series of experiments designed to test eyewitness reliability under controlled conditions, recreating common anomalous scenarios with known variables, and the narrator is fascinated by how consistently perception diverges from reality, how confident observers can be profoundly mistaken, and he notes the humility embedded in these findings, a reminder that sincerity does not guarantee accuracy, and that doubt, far from being cynical, is an ethical stance. The tone grows more philosophical as the narrator begins to articulate a central tension emerging from the series, the conflict between the human need for coherence and the world's resistance to it, and he reflects on how mysteries offer narrative structure, villains, visitors, watchers, while reality often offers randomness, indifference, and incomplete information, and he wonders whether belief in hidden intelligences serves as a way to reintroduce agency into an otherwise impersonal universe. This line of thought deepens as the narrative explores alleged encounters involving communication, lights responding to human attention, patterns appearing intentional, and the narrator listens as physicists and cognitive scientists explain how pattern recognition evolved as a survival mechanism, predisposed to false positives because the cost of missing a threat outweighed the cost of imagining one, and he sees how this evolutionary legacy shapes modern encounters with the unknown, predisposing us to perceive intent where none may exist. The chapter then circles back to technology, examining artificial intelligence and automated detection systems increasingly used to identify anomalies, and the narrator is struck by the irony that machines designed to remove human bias often reproduce it, because they are trained on human-labeled data, inheriting our assumptions, blind spots, and expectations. And he considers how future mysteries may emerge not from what humans see but from what machines flag as anomalous, raising new questions about authorship, interpretation, and trust. As Part 6 advances, the narrator begins to feel a subtle shift in emphasis, from seeking proof to cultivating discernment, and he recognizes that the proof is out there is quietly advocating a form of disciplined wonder, an approach that neither rejects mystery nor romanticizes it, but holds it at a distance sufficient for reflection. And he finds this stance increasingly rare and valuable in a cultural environment polarized between credulity and dismissal. A deeply reflective segment features a roundtable discussion where experts admit that some questions may never be answered conclusively, not because of conspiracy or suppression but because evidence degrades, memories fade, and contexts vanish, and the narrator feels a quiet acceptance emerge. A recognition that uncertainty is not an enemy to be defeated but a condition to be managed. He then turns inward once more, examining his own evolving response to the series, noting how his initial excitement has matured into something steadier, less urgent, more contemplative, and he realizes that the show's greatest impact may lie not in what it reveals about UFOs or cryptids but in what it teaches about thinking itself, about patience, humility, and the courage to revise beliefs. The closing movement of Part 6 is subdued, almost meditative, as the narrator imagines the world layered with signals, some meaningful, some random, many indistinguishable from one another, and he senses that the task is not to decode them all but to develop the wisdom to know which ones deserve pursuit, and at what cost. He ends this chapter acknowledging that the inquiry is approaching its most challenging phase, where the boundary between external mystery and internal perception grows increasingly porous, and he pauses there, aware that the next stage will demand not better evidence but deeper self-examination, and he invites the listener to continue forward into questions that no longer ask simply what is out there, but what kind of knowing we are capable of sustaining in a world that refuses to resolve itself neatly. Part 7 begins with an almost imperceptible inward turn, as though the proof is out there has decided that after tracing lights across skies, shadows through forests, and echoes beneath oceans, it must now confront the most unstable terrain of all, the interior landscape of the human mind, and the narrator feels this shift immediately, sensing that the mysteries ahead will be less about external phenomena and more about interpretation, belief, and the fragile boundary between observation and conviction. And he opens this chapter with a case centered on a lone astronomer working from a private observatory, a meticulous individual who notices subtle irregularities in the movement of distant objects, anomalies so small they could easily be dismissed as calibration errors, yet persistent enough to trouble someone trained to trust precision, and the narrator is drawn to the patience of this figure. The way nights pass in silence, punctuated only by data points that refuse to align perfectly, because this kind of mystery lacks spectacle, unfolding slowly, almost invisibly, and it challenges the popular image of the unexplained as sudden and dramatic. Experts examine the astronomer's findings, pointing to atmospheric distortion, software rounding errors, and the inherent uncertainty of long-distance observation, and the narrator appreciates how the show treats this not as a debunking but as a lesson in skill, reminding viewers that the universe is vast beyond intuitive comprehension, and that small discrepancies are inevitable when measuring phenomena across unimaginable distances. Yet he also notes the lingering discomfort, the awareness that even tiny errors can accumulate into significant misinterpretations if left unchecked, From the quiet of the observatory, the narrative pivots to a much more emotionally charged case, involving a group of individuals who claim to have shared a single anomalous experience, a sudden flash of light followed by a collective sense of disorientation and lost time, and the narrator is immediately attentive to the language used, the striking similarity in descriptions, not only of what was seen but of how it felt, and he recognizes the power of shared narrative, how communal recounting can synchronize memory, smoothing discrepancies into coherence. Neuroscientists and psychologists analyze the case, discussing group dynamics, suggestibility, and the malleability of memory, and the narrator finds himself reflecting on how memory is not a recording but a reconstruction, reshaped each time it is recalled, especially in social contexts, and he realizes that some of the most convincing mysteries may emerge not from deception but from sincere collective misremembering. The show treats this with care, emphasizing that sincerity and accuracy are not synonymous, and the narrator senses a deep ethical undercurrent here, a commitment to preserving human dignity even while challenging belief. As Part 7 unfolds, attention shifts to the phenomenon of repeated witnesses, individuals who report multiple encounters over long periods of time, and the narrator is intrigued by this pattern, because repetition suggests either an external persistence or an internal predisposition, and the proof is out there explores both possibilities, examining environmental factors, lifestyle patterns, and psychological profiles without reducing experience to pathology, and this balance resonates strongly with the narrator, who recognizes how easily skepticism can slide into condescension if not carefully disciplined. One particularly compelling case involves a former search and rescue volunteer who reports encountering unexplained lights during nocturnal operations, lights that appear to track movement before vanishing abruptly, and the narrator is struck by the witnesses' credibility, their familiarity with darkness, terrain, and stress, and he watches as investigators recreate the conditions, demonstrating how flares, drones, and even headlamp reflections can produce startling illusions under fatigue, and he notes how explanation here feels less like negation and more like translation, converting fear into understanding without erasing its emotional reality. This leads the narrator to reflect on how many mysteries arise not from ignorance but from context collapse, moments where familiar cues are stripped away, leaving perception unmoored, and he considers how modern life, despite its technological saturation, still leaves individuals vulnerable to such moments, especially in transitional spaces between day and night, urban and rural, safety and exposure. The narrative deepens further as the proof is out there introduces a segment on belief persistence, examining why some individuals maintain conviction even after compelling alternative explanations are presented, and the narrator listens as cognitive scientists discuss confirmation bias, identity protective cognition, and the role of belief in providing meaning, and he finds himself unsettled by the realization that belief often serves functions beyond truth-seeking, offering community, purpose, or emotional grounding, and he begins to understand that debunking, while intellectually satisfying, can feel existentially threatening to those whose beliefs anchor their sense of self. The show approaches this insight with sensitivity, framing skepticism not as an attack but as an invitation to re-examine assumptions, and the narrator appreciates this tone, recognizing it as essential in a cultural climate where disagreement often escalates into hostility. Midway through Part 7, the narrative takes an unexpected turn, focusing on children's encounters with the unexplained, reports of strange figures, lights, or sounds interpreted through youthful imagination, and the narrator is particularly attentive here, because childhood perception occupies a unique space, less constrained by learned categories yet deeply influenced by storytelling, and experts discuss developmental psychology, the blending of imagination and perception, and the gradual acquisition of reality testing skills, and the narrator reflects on how early experiences with mystery can shape lifelong attitudes toward the unknown, either fostering curiosity or fear depending on how they are framed. The show's handling of these cases is notably careful, avoiding sensationalism and emphasizing guidance, reassurance, and critical thinking, And the narrator senses a moral responsibility at work, an awareness that mystery, when mishandled, can harm as easily as inspire. The focus then returns to technology, examining how image enhancement, slow motion, and digital zoom, tools often used to clarify footage, can inadvertently introduce artifacts that appear anomalous, and the narrator watches as experts demonstrate how pixels interpolate, edges sharpen artificially, and noise becomes form, and he is struck by how easily technology can create the illusion of revelation, and how often certainty emerges from manipulation rather than discovery. This technical exploration reinforces a central theme of Part 7, that seeing more does not always mean understanding more, and that increased resolution can magnify error as readily as truth. The narrator begins to weave these insights together, recognizing a pattern in which mystery migrates as explanations advance, retreating from one domain only to reappear in another, shifting from physical objects to psychological processes, from external phenomena to internal interpretation, and he realizes that the proof is out there is gradually dismantling the notion of mystery as something separate from humanity, repositioning it instead as an emergent property of the interaction between will and mind. A particularly introspective segment features a philosopher of science discussing the limits of empirical inquiry, not as a failure of science but as a boundary condition, and the narrator lingers on this discussion, contemplating how some questions may be meaningful even if they are not empirically solvable, and he wonders whether the insistence on proof sometimes obscures other forms of understanding. Emotional, symbolic, existential, that coexist alongside scientific explanation without competing with it. As Part 7 progresses, the narrator becomes aware of a subtle emotional shift within himself, a softening of urgency, a movement away from the need to categorize experiences as true or false, real or unreal, toward a more nuanced appreciation of how experiences function within human lives, and he acknowledges that this shift does not weaken critical thinking but deepens it, integrating skepticism with empathy. The narrative then explores the phenomenon of recurrence in specific locations, so-called hotspots where anomalous reports cluster over time, and the narrator is fascinated by how geography intersects with psychology, how places acquire reputations that shape expectation, and experts analyze environmental factors, magnetic anomalies, and sociocultural reinforcement, demonstrating how location itself can become a participant in mystery, a stage that invites certain interpretations while discouraging others. This insight reinforces the theme of disguise, now understood as contextual transformation, the way ordinary phenomena adopt extraordinary significance when framed by expectation, history, and narrative. The narrator reflects on how the proof is out there repeatedly dismantles the binary between believer and skeptic, revealing a spectrum of engagement shaped by emotion, identity, and experience, and he recognizes the show's quiet ambition, not to settle debates but to elevate them, encouraging a more reflective, less adversarial approach to the unknown. As Part 7 nears its conclusion, the narrator revisits earlier cases in his mind, noticing how his interpretation of them has changed, how what once felt urgent now feels instructive, and he realizes that the series operates cumulatively, its impact emerging not from any single revelation but from sustained exposure to complexity, and he feels a growing respect for this method, this refusal to offer easy answers in favor of durable understanding. The final movement of this chapter is contemplative, as the narrator considers the possibility that mystery is not a problem to be solved but a condition to be navigated, and that the value of the proof is out there lies not in resolving the unknown but in modeling how to live alongside it without surrendering reason or imagination. He imagines the future of inquiry, shaped by ever more sophisticated tools yet still constrained by human perception, and he senses that the next stage of the journey will confront even deeper questions about consciousness, reality, and the stories we tell to bridge the gap between what we know and what we cannot, and he pauses there, standing once again at the edge of continuation, aware that the path forward will demand even greater introspection, and he turns to the listener, inviting them to decide whether to proceed further into this unfolding exploration, where the unknown no longer feels external but intimately intertwined with the act of knowing itself. Part 8 opens with a sense of convergence, as though all the strands traced so far by the proof is out there, the lights, the figures, the witnesses, the instruments, the doubts, are slowly being drawn toward a shared center, and the narrator feels that this chapter must grapple not with new categories of phenomena but with the cumulative pressure they exert on human understanding, because after so many cases, so many near answers and careful refusals of certainty, the question is no longer whether something unexplained exists, but how sustained uncertainty alters the way people relate to reality itself, and he frames this exploration through a case that is deceptively modest, a long-term time-lapse camera installed by a group of environmental researchers in a remote valley, intended to monitor erosion and wildlife migration, which instead captures intermittent bursts of light appearing at irregular intervals, sometimes faint, sometimes intense, never quite consistent enough to classify, and what immediately draws the narrator in is the duration of the data set, years rather than days, because duration transforms anomaly into pattern, and pattern demands interpretation. Physicists analyze the footage, discussing bioluminescence, atmospheric plasma, rare electrical discharges, and camera sensor quirks, and the narrator listens carefully, aware that none of these explanations fully collapse the phenomenon into banality, yet none require an extraordinary leap either, and he recognizes in this case a distilled version of the show's philosophy, where the unknown is not an affront to reason but a prompt for refinement. As the narrative unfolds, the focus shifts to the researchers themselves, how their perception of the lights changes over time, moving from excitement to routine to a kind of quiet intimacy, and the narrator is struck by how familiarity alters mystery, not by resolving it but by integrating it into daily expectation, and he begins to wonder whether the fear and wonder associated with the unexplained depend less on the phenomenon than on novelty, because what persists eventually becomes background, even if it is never fully understood. From this valley, the story broadens outward, examining how communities adapt to long-standing anomalies, featuring towns built near recurring UFO sighting locations or cryptid hotspots. And the narrator observes how these communities develop a pragmatic relationship with mystery, weaving it into local identity, tourism, humor, and cautionary tales, and he notes how the proof is out there resists caricature here, presenting residents not as zealots or fools but as people negotiating uncertainty in practical ways, balancing skepticism with openness, because when mystery becomes local, it must coexist with groceries, schools, and weather forecasts. Sociologists discuss how normalization operates, how repeated exposure reduces emotional intensity while preserving narrative significance, and the narrator reflects on how this mirrors human adaptation to risk and ambiguity more broadly, from living near fault lines to coexisting with technologies not fully understood, and he realizes that mystery, in this sense, is not exceptional but ubiquitous, merely concentrated in certain places and stories. The narrative then introduces a more unsettling dimension, focusing on individuals who report a lifelong sense of connection to anomalous phenomena, people who feel drawn to certain locations, skies, or patterns, and the narrator listens as psychologists discuss meaning-making, identity formation, and the human tendency to weave personal narratives around coincidence, and he appreciates how the show carefully avoids reducing these experiences to delusions, instead situating them within a broader spectrum of human engagement with uncertainty, acknowledging that meaning can be subjectively real even when its external referent remains unverified. This leads to a segment examining dreams and altered states, cases where individuals report vivid encounters occurring at the threshold of sleep, and the narrator is fascinated by how the proof is out there approaches this territory with scientific seriousness, featuring sleep researchers who explain hypnagogic hallucinations, paralysis, and the brain's capacity to generate immersive realities, and he notes how these explanations, rather than trivializing the experiences, render them more astonishing, revealing the mind itself as a frontier as strange as any distant planet or hidden forest. As Part 8 deepens, the narrator senses a thematic shift toward responsibility, the ethical implications of presenting and consuming mystery, and he frames this through a case involving a viral video of a supposed humanoid figure captured on a city street at night, which sparks widespread panic before being revealed as a performance art installation misinterpreted through grainy footage and rumor, and he watches as investigators reconstruct the chain of amplification, from initial posts to sensational headlines to public fear, and he feels a sober recognition emerge, because here the harm is tangible: anxiety, misinformation, distrust, and he reflects on how the proof is out there positions itself as an antidote to such cascades, emphasizing verification, context, and restraint. Media analysts discuss the economics of attention, how algorithms reward emotional intensity over accuracy, and the narrator recognizes that mystery, when stripped of discipline, becomes a tool for manipulation, and this recognition adds moral weight to the show's insistence on process over spectacle. The narrative then turns toward technology's future role, examining increasingly autonomous systems designed to detect anomalies in vast data streams, from satellite imagery to ocean sensors, and the narrator is struck by the paradox that as detection becomes automated, interpretation becomes more contested, because machines can flag irregularity but cannot assign meaning, leaving humans to argue over significance, and he considers how future mysteries may emerge not from eyewitnesses but from dashboards and alerts, anomalies discovered without human perception, raising questions about trust, authority, and epistemic ownership. Philosophers and ethicists weigh in, discussing how knowledge produced by opaque systems challenges traditional notions of evidence, and the narrator senses that the proof is out there is gesturing toward a future where mystery is not diminished by technology but transformed, shifting from what we see to what we infer. Midway through Part 8, the narrative revisits the ocean, focusing on long-term acoustic recordings revealing unexplained sounds, low-frequency pulses that defy easy classification, and the narrator feels a familiar awe, because sound, especially when detached from visible source, taps into deep-seated unease, and he listens as marine biologists explain ice movement, tectonic activity, and animal vocalizations, gradually mapping the plausible origins of the sounds, yet he notes how the vastness of the ocean preserves uncertainty, because even with explanation, the sense of something immense and hidden persists, and he reflects on how skill itself functions as a form of disguise. The show then introduces a reflective segment on silence, the absence of anomaly, examining periods where anticipated phenomena fail to appear, and the narrator is intrigued by this reversal, because absence is rarely treated as data, yet it shapes expectation profoundly, and experts discuss regression to the mean, observer bias, and the human tendency to notice deviation more than consistency, and he realizes that mystery thrives not only on what happens but on what we expect to happen and does not. As Part 8 progresses, the narrator becomes increasingly aware of his own transformation as a guide through these layers, noting how his language has shifted from certainty to conditionality, from assertion to inquiry, and he acknowledges this shift explicitly, recognizing that engagement with the proof is out there has altered not only what he thinks about the unknown but how he thinks. Cultivating patience, skepticism tempered by wonder, and an acceptance of provisional understanding, this introspection deepens as the narrative explores the concept of closure, featuring individuals who have actively sought to disengage from mystery after years of pursuit, stepping away from forums, investigations, and speculation to reclaim a sense of normalcy. And the narrator listens as they describe relief mixed with loss, because letting go of mystery can feel like abandoning a relationship, and he is struck by how belief, even when unverified, can provide structure, motivation, and community, and how relinquishing it requires mourning. Psychologists discuss how closure is negotiated rather than achieved, and the narrator appreciates how the show treats disengagement not as defeat but as choice, reinforcing the idea that engagement with the unknown is voluntary, not obligatory. The narrative then returns to the theme of disguise with renewed subtlety, examining how Ordinary phenomena masquerade as extraordinary, and how extraordinary experiences are often dressed in ordinary language, and the narrator reflects on how this duality complicates any simple taxonomy of belief and skepticism, because the boundary between them is porous, constantly renegotiated through experience, context, and trust. A particularly nuanced case involves a misidentified astronomical event that nonetheless inspires a community art project celebrating cosmic connection, and the narrator is moved by how meaning emerges even from error, suggesting that the value of mystery may lie not solely in its factual resolution but in its capacity to inspire reflection, creativity, and humility. As Part 8 approaches its later stages, the narrator synthesizes these threads, recognizing that the proof is out there is gradually reframing proof itself, not as a binary outcome but as a spectrum of confidence, context, and consequence, and he sees how this reframing challenges cultural habits of absolutism, inviting viewers to inhabit uncertainty without anxiety. The emotional tone becomes contemplative, almost gentle, as the narrator considers how the unknown functions as a mirror, reflecting human hopes, fears, and limitations, and he acknowledges that while the show investigates phenomena labeled as UFOs, cryptids, or anomalies, its deeper inquiry is into epistemology and ethics, into how humans decide what to believe, when to doubt, and how to live responsibly with questions that resist resolution. The final movement of Part 8 is expansive, as the narrator imagines the Earth itself as an archive of unresolved signals, lights in the sky, sounds in the deep, traces in forests, patterns in data, and he senses that the task is not to exhaust this archive but to approach it with care, curiosity, and restraint, recognizing that not every question demands an answer and not every anomaly demands belief. He pauses on this realization, aware that the journey is approaching a more existential horizon, where inquiry turns toward values, trust, and the stories societies tell to orient themselves within vast uncertainty, and he closes this chapter with a quiet invitation, not to solve the mystery, but to continue walking alongside it, attentive to its disguises and its revelations, ready to confront the next layer where the unknown no longer feels distant but intimately woven into the fabric of human meaning. Part 9 begins with a noticeable intensification, as though the proof is out there has recognized that the previous layers, witness testimony, technological analysis, cognitive interpretation, were merely preparatory, and now the narrative is ready to confront the intersections where the unknown intrudes not just into perception but into emotion, morality, and social dynamics, and the narrator senses a shift from observing phenomena to observing the human responses to those phenomena, because the stories themselves have begun to exert pressure, shaping relationships, careers, and community identity, and he frames this chapter through a case that is at once personal and communal, a series of Midwestern farm reports describing not only lights in the sky but the sudden appearance of strange footprints near livestock pens, footprints elongated, deeply impressed, sometimes accompanied by peculiar hair or residue, and the narrator is immediately attentive to the layering of sensory detail. The tactile reality of disturbed soil, the faint odor described by some witnesses, the tension between the ordinary routines of farm life and the intrusion of the inexplicable. Forensic analysts examine the evidence meticulously, noting track morphology, soil compaction, and potential contamination, while wildlife biologists consider misidentified animal prints or hoaxing, and the narrator appreciates the careful navigation between skepticism and empathy, because the families involved experience genuine fear, uncertainty, and disruption, and dismissing their testimony outright would be both inaccurate and cruel. As the narrative unfolds, the show alternates between micro-level detail and macro-level perspective, tracing how localized experiences ripple outward, attracting amateur investigators, journalists, and online communities. And the narrator is struck by the socio-cultural feedback loop that emerges, where collective attention amplifies anecdote into folklore, yet also prompts more rigorous documentation and analysis, creating a dynamic tension between myth-making and methodical inquiry. Psychologists discuss the role of expectation and suggestion, illustrating how social reinforcement can solidify perception even in the absence of objective anomaly, and the narrator observes that the ethical challenge is profound. Investigators must honor the witness's experience while not letting belief substitute for evidence, and he senses that this tension constitutes the emotional core of much of the series. The narrative then introduces a fascinating technological dimension, a case involving thermal imaging cameras capturing unidentified heat signatures at night, sometimes static, sometimes moving in ways that seem deliberate, and the narrator watches as engineers dissect camera calibration, sensor noise, atmospheric effects, and thermal reflection, revealing multiple plausible natural explanations, and yet he notes how the imagery remains compelling, how heat patterns cast in the darkness evoke not merely curiosity but visceral apprehension, demonstrating that human interpretation often amplifies even neutral phenomena into perceived threat or intelligence. Midway through Part 9, the show presents a segment on long-term patterns, examining regions where UFO and cryptid reports persist across decades, and the narrator notes the layering of generational expectation, how local law and family stories shape each subsequent observation, creating an intergenerational tapestry of narrative and perception, and he reflects on how memory, culture, and geography intertwine to preserve anomaly even when individual events are explainable. Sociologists discuss how communities adapt, balancing humor, caution, tourism, and collective identity, and the narrator is struck by the moral subtlety. Mystery becomes both a shared resource and a potential source of conflict, fostering cohesion in some contexts and paranoia in others. The narrative then pivots to cases involving physiological and neurological effects, where witnesses report increased heart rate, temperature changes, or even temporary sensory distortions during encounters with unexplained lights or figures, and the narrator listens as experts discuss stress response, adrenaline, and heightened perception under threat, noting that these bodily reactions, while fully natural, can create subjective experience so compelling that skepticism feels inadequate, and he recognizes that the show deliberately foregrounds this interplay between body, mind, and environment to demonstrate that mystery operates across multiple dimensions simultaneously. As Part 9 advances, the narrator encounters cases of mass observation, events where dozens or hundreds of witnesses report similar anomalies within the same temporal window, and he reflects on how these collective experiences are shaped by environmental cues, social reinforcement, and expectation, but also how they generate real emotional intensity and sometimes societal consequences, because perception, once shared, becomes harder to disentangle from reality. Anthropologists are interviewed to discuss cultural motifs that recur in these collective sightings, shapes, lights, behaviors, which the narrator finds fascinating, because it demonstrates that human cognition both constrains and colors the unknown, producing patterns that feel universal yet are contingent on environment, history, and narrative precedent. The narrative then shifts toward technological mediation of mystery, examining live streams, security camera footage, and drone photography, and the narrator notes the duality. Technology extends observation but introduces artifacts, misperception, and viral distortion, creating a landscape in which evidence and illusion coexist, reinforcing the theme that proof is not simply out there but emerges through careful interpretation. A particularly poignant segment follows investigators revisiting cases that remain unexplained despite exhaustive inquiry, and the narrator observes the quiet professionalism required to hold uncertainty without succumbing to sensationalism or dismissal, noting that the emotional endurance of investigators parallels the cognitive endurance demanded of viewers, and that sustained engagement with ambiguity is itself a rare and valuable skill. The narrative introduces a morally and emotionally charged case where online speculation about a supposed cryptid attack incites local panic, and the narrator watches as public safety officials, journalists, and community leaders negotiate fact, rumor, and emotion, demonstrating that the human consequences of anomaly often outweigh the anomaly itself, and he reflects on how responsibly framing the unknown is as important as any discovery. Midway through the latter half of Part 9, The focus turns inward, as the narrator examines his own cognitive responses, noticing how repeated exposure to ambiguity, careful debunking, and the disciplined presentation of evidence cultivates both skepticism and wonder, a dual awareness that refuses to settle for simplistic categorization. He contrasts this with the societal urge for resolution, the discomfort provoked by unresolved questions, and he senses that the tension between closure and curiosity is central to the show's enduring impact. The narrative then explores the interface between natural science and folklore, documenting how anomalous experiences often inspire myths, rituals, and artistic expression, and the narrator is fascinated by how error, imagination, and observation coalesce to produce culture, suggesting that the social life of mystery is as significant as any empirical investigation. The chapter builds toward a climax by examining cases where evidence, expectation, and interpretation converge in unsettling ways: thermal anomalies, intermittent lights, footprints, recordings of sounds, and eyewitness accounts collectively defy simple classification, not because each individual element is inexplicable but because their combination generates a gestalt that exceeds the sum of its parts, and the narrator feels the pressure of cumulative ambiguity, the emotional resonance of multimodal evidence interacting with human perception. The narrative closes with a meditation on continuity and impermanence, reflecting on how the archive of mysteries, reported sightings, recordings, testimonies, persists even as individual memory fades, technologies change, and communities shift, and he acknowledges that the unknown is simultaneously eternal and ephemeral, woven into the human experience in ways that resist finality, and he pauses there, aware that the next chapter will probe even more deeply into the intersections of perception, reality, and meaning, inviting viewers to confront not just phenomena, but the consequences of engagement itself. Part 10 begins with a noticeable deepening of thematic scope, as though the proof is out there is shifting from cataloging anomalies to examining the interplay between mystery and human cognition, and the narrator senses that the previous emphasis on observation, testimony, and technology now converges with questions of interpretation, ethics, and cultural meaning, and he frames this chapter around a series of interconnected cases that illuminate the psychological and sociological dimensions of persistent anomalies. First, a sequence of night vision recordings from a dense forest region, where dozens of hikers, campers, and amateur documentarians report seeing elongated figures moving silently between trees, accompanied by brief flashes of unidentifiable light, and the narrator is immediately attentive to the way these sightings interact with environment, expectation, and prior law, producing experiences that feel urgent, vivid, and emotionally resonant even when technical analysis offers mundane explanations. The show presents detailed footage alongside expert commentary, noting how long exposure effects, adaptation to low light, and visual pareidolia can produce compelling illusions, and the narrator appreciates the balanced approach, where neither witness credibility nor analytical rigor is sacrificed, but rather integrated to illuminate the processes by which perception, memory, and context shape what is seen and remembered. From the forest, the narrative expands to a cultural perspective, exploring how regional myths about cryptids influence witness interpretation, and the narrator observes how folklore functions both as lens and framework, filtering experience through symbolic and narrative templates, and he reflects on the recursive nature of this process, how each new observation reinforces communal expectations, which in turn shape subsequent perception. Mid-chapter, the show pivots to technology once more, examining how automated anomaly detection systems deployed on satellite networks, oceanic sensors, and atmospheric monitoring platforms are producing alerts that challenge both technical and philosophical definitions of unknown, and the narrator is struck by the paradox. As systems improve in resolution and sensitivity, they detect more anomalies, yet interpretation becomes more fraught, because higher fidelity reveals complexity without clarity, producing phenomena that demand human judgment even when human perception is limited. Experts demonstrate how machine learning can amplify subtle deviations into apparent patterns, and the narrator notes that these technological insights parallel the show's thematic core, illustrating how unknowns persist not solely due to human ignorance but because the world itself presents infinite variation, complexity, and emergent properties. The narrative then examines the emotional dimension of long-term investigation, profiling individuals who dedicate years to documenting anomalous events, and the narrator is particularly attentive to the psychological costs, obsession, fatigue, social isolation, and the oscillation between excitement and disappointment, and he reflects on the ethical responsibility of the show to represent these investigators with nuance, neither glamorizing obsession nor dismissing commitment. And he senses that this careful portrayal models an approach to mystery grounded in sustained attention, humility, and respect. A particularly compelling segment explores cross-generational belief, showing how children raised in communities with persistent UFO or cryptid lore absorb both skepticism and wonder from adults, producing complex attitudes toward uncertainty, and the narrator notes how these developmental experiences shape cognitive heuristics, emotional responses, and social behavior, creating individuals uniquely attuned to pattern, anomaly, and ambiguity, yet also vulnerable to overinterpretation. The show integrates interviews with neuroscientists who describe mechanisms of expectation, confirmation bias, and memory reconstruction, and the narrator finds these analyses not merely explanatory but revealing of the human condition, demonstrating how cognition itself produces forms of mystery, and how mystery, in turn, shapes cognition. As Part 10 unfolds, the focus shifts toward communal dynamics, exploring how groups respond when anomalies intersect with social media virality, and the narrator observes the acceleration of rumor, interpretation, and collective belief, noting that modern platforms compress time, amplify attention, and create feedback loops that can render a single ambiguous event culturally significant almost instantaneously, and he reflects on the responsibility of investigators, journalists, and viewers alike in managing these dynamics. A mid-chapter sequence examines long-term environmental monitoring projects, where repeated measurements of atmospheric, oceanic, and geomagnetic phenomena reveal subtle anomalies that are statistically significant yet remain unexplained, and the narrator is fascinated by how scientific method, far from eradicating mystery, sometimes magnifies it, because rigorous measurement exposes complexity that resists reduction, and he recognizes a thematic through line. The Proof is Out There emphasizes that the pursuit of understanding often deepens engagement with the unknown rather than resolving it. The narrative then examines the interplay between personal meaning and communal myth, showing cases where individuals interpret otherwise mundane events as significant due to prior belief, cultural narratives, or emotional salience, and the narrator notes the delicate balance. Humans naturally seek narrative coherence, yet their frameworks for understanding are themselves partial, situating meaning as much in perception as in external reality. Experts discuss epistemic humility, the necessity of provisional conclusions, and the ethical implications of communicating uncertainty, and the narrator reflects on how this awareness pervades the show, reinforcing a model of engagement with mystery that is intellectually rigorous yet emotionally intelligent. A particularly haunting segment focuses on the phenomenology of fear and awe, showing that even when anomalies are explained technically, the emotional imprint of uncertainty persists, shaping memory, decision-making, and imagination. And the narrator observes that this persistence may explain why humanity repeatedly returns to the same questions, seeking both explanation and experience, insight and emotional resonance. The chapter also explores comparative mythology, linking reported anomalous phenomena with historical accounts of celestial lights, forest spirits, and oceanic monsters, and the narrator recognizes the universality of human engagement with the inexplicable, understanding that these patterns emerge not merely from coincidence but from cognitive and cultural structures that predispose humans to encode uncertainty in narrative, ritual, and observation. In the latter half of Part 10, the narrative emphasizes epistemic humility, showing investigators reflecting on limitations, acknowledging errors, and maintaining rigorous yet flexible standards of evidence, and the narrator notes the subtle artistry in this approach. Uncertainty is neither punished nor glorified, it is navigated, modeled, and respected, which he identifies as perhaps the deepest lesson of the series. The chapter closes with a meditation on continuity, noting how the proof is out there archives events, observations, and interpretations not merely to prove or disprove, but to preserve the process of inquiry itself, and the narrator reflects on how this archival commitment transforms mystery from a fleeting spectacle into an enduring framework for learning, engagement, and reflection. He concludes by noting that the journey is approaching its final stages, where the focus will shift increasingly towards synthesis, insight, and contemplation, moving from cataloging anomalies to reflecting on their meaning, patterns, and implications, and he pauses there, inviting the viewer to continue toward the next chapter, aware that the questions ahead will probe the deepest intersections of perception, reality, and human significance. Part 11 opens with an air of synthesis, as though the proof is out there is shifting from the documentation of discrete events toward an exploration of their cumulative significance, and the narrator senses that this chapter will examine not just what was observed, but what these observations reveal about perception, belief, and the structures that mediate human understanding, and he frames the discussion around a set of long-term cases that highlight continuity, recurrence, and cultural resonance. A desert region where lights have been documented for decades, forests where elongated figures intermittently appear on trail cameras, coastal areas with anomalous sonar readings, and the narrator is struck by how, when examined collectively, these phenomena form patterns suggestive not merely of isolated incidents but of persistent unknowns that challenge conventional explanation. The narrative opens with interviews from multi-generational witnesses who describe subtle variations in the experience, changes in light behavior, movement patterns, and emotional intensity, and the narrator notes that these shifts, rather than diminishing the mystery, reveal the interplay between human perception, memory, and environmental context, and he reflects on the way the proof is out there juxtaposes technical analysis with subjective experience, emphasizing that understanding arises not only from instruments but from empathetic engagement with those who experience the anomalous. Forensic and environmental experts are consulted, analyzing soil samples, atmospheric data, and photographic anomalies, and the narrator appreciates how the show meticulously differentiates between what can be objectively measured and what remains interpretively ambiguous, and he recognizes that the tension between evidence and uncertainty is central to the narrative, creating space for both rigor and wonder. Mid-chapter, attention shifts to the social dimension, examining communities that have formed around persistent anomalies, including local folklore, social gatherings, and online forums where narratives circulate, mutate, and sometimes solidify into shared beliefs, and the narrator observes how these communal structures shape both expectation and perception, reinforcing the idea that mystery is co-constructed through culture as well as encountered in the physical world. The narrative then delves into the cognitive aspects of long-term engagement with mystery, profiling investigators who have dedicated decades to observation, data collection, and analysis, and the narrator notes the psychological cost of such dedication, obsessive focus, social isolation, fatigue, and the oscillation between elation and disappointment, and he reflects on how the proof is out there portrays these investigators with nuance, highlighting both their intellectual rigor and their vulnerability, demonstrating that sustained engagement with uncertainty requires emotional as well as cognitive resilience. The chapter then explores the role of expectation and interpretation, revisiting cases of mass sightings where environmental cues, cultural knowledge, and social reinforcement converge to produce shared experiences, and the narrator observes that these patterns illustrate how perception is not purely passive but actively structured by context, anticipation, and memory, and he appreciates how the show models a reflective approach, where anomalies are neither automatically validated nor dismissed, but carefully situated within intersecting domains of evidence, expertise, and human experience, A particularly compelling section examines phenomena captured by increasingly sophisticated technology, thermal imaging, radar, satellite data, revealing patterns that are consistent yet resist definitive explanation. And the narrator notes that this convergence of modalities amplifies both credibility and ambiguity, creating a sense of persistent presence that engages both the analytical and imaginative faculties, and he reflects on how the proof is out there balances technical sophistication with narrative clarity, allowing viewers to engage deeply without feeling lost. Midway through the chapter, the narrative addresses the psychological and cultural function of mystery, showing how unexplained phenomena serve as focal points for identity, meaning-making, and community, and the narrator is struck by the dual nature of this engagement. Mystery can inspire creativity, critical thinking, and awe, while also generating anxiety, rumor, and social friction, and he recognizes that the show consistently foregrounds ethical responsibility in engagement, emphasizing that curiosity must be tempered with respect and caution. The narrative then examines comparative myth, connecting contemporary reports of lights, figures, and unexplained sounds with historical accounts from diverse cultures, and the narrator observes how similar patterns, celestial phenomena, forest spirits, oceanic monsters, emerge across time and space, suggesting that while the external causes may differ, the human experience of anomaly follows deep cognitive and cultural templates, reinforcing the idea that perception is always mediated by expectation, context, and meaning-making. The latter half of Part 11 focuses on reflection and synthesis, drawing together technical, psychological, and social perspectives, and the narrator notes that this integrative approach highlights the enduring tension between explanation and uncertainty, showing that even when phenomena can be partially accounted for, the human experience of mystery persists, because meaning is not reducible to data alone. The show presents candid interviews with investigators reflecting on unresolved cases, acknowledging gaps in knowledge, revising assumptions, and modeling intellectual humility, and the narrator is impressed by how this openness to uncertainty becomes a core ethical stance, demonstrating that the pursuit of understanding is ongoing and iterative, rather than conclusively final. The chapter closes with an exploration of absence and silence, examining periods where anticipated anomalies fail to appear, and the narrator reflects on how these absences shape expectation, influence interpretation, and produce their own form of subtle mystery, highlighting that engagement with the unknown involves attending as much to what does not occur as to what does. The final movement of Part 11 is contemplative, as the narrator synthesizes the chapter's themes: continuity, perception, community, expectation, and epistemic humility, and he notes that the proof is out there has gradually shifted from documenting phenomena to modeling an approach to knowledge, showing how humans can navigate uncertainty with both rigor and wonder. And he pauses, aware that Part 12 will move toward culmination, addressing the philosophical and existential dimensions of anomaly, perception, and human meaning, inviting viewers to consider not just what is out there, but how engagement with the unknown transforms understanding itself. Part 12 opens with a sense of culmination and reflection, as though the proof is out there has been guiding viewers not merely through reports of anomalous phenomena but into a deeper meditation on the interplay between perception, belief, and the limits of understanding, and the narrator immediately senses that this final chapter will confront the existential and philosophical dimensions of mystery, synthesizing the technical, psychological, cultural, and ethical threads developed throughout the series. The narrative begins by revisiting long-term case studies, remote deserts where recurring lights have been documented for decades, dense forests with repeated figure sightings, coastal waters producing anomalous sonar readings, and high-altitude events captured by multiple independent observers, and the narrator notes how the cumulative weight of these reports produces a tapestry of persistent unknowns, a phenomenon not confined to a single moment or location but woven into the very fabric of human observation and interpretation. The chapter emphasizes the human experience of anomaly, exploring how repeated exposure shapes cognition, memory, an emotional response, and the narrator observes that witnesses often experience a complex mixture of awe, fear, skepticism, and wonder, emotions that persist even when plausible natural explanations are presented, demonstrating that mystery resides not only in external events but also in the human mind's engagement with them. Interviews with long-term investigators provide insight into the psychological and ethical challenges of sustained inquiry, highlighting the need for patience, resilience, and humility, and the narrator is struck by how these professionals navigate the tension between the desire for resolution and the recognition that uncertainty is an enduring and instructive condition, teaching lessons about epistemic responsibility, empathy, and interpretive care. Mid-chapter, the narrative examines the intersection of technology and perception, showing how increasingly sophisticated tools, thermal imaging, high-resolution satellite data, autonomous anomaly detection systems, amplify both clarity and ambiguity, because while machines can detect patterns invisible to human eyes, they cannot assign meaning, leaving interpretation and ethical responsibility in human hands. And the narrator reflects on how this dynamic mirrors the broader relationship between observation, evidence, and belief. The show then addresses the social and cultural dimensions of mystery, illustrating how communities integrate anomalous phenomena into local law, identity, and social practice, and the narrator notes how folklore, narrative, and expectation shape perception, reinforcing the idea that mystery is as much co-constructed by human cognition and culture as it is encountered in the external world. Part 12 also explores the neurological and psychological mechanisms underlying human engagement with the unknown, including expectation, pattern recognition, memory reconstruction, and the emotional salience of uncertainty, and the narrator observes that these mechanisms help explain why experiences labeled as UFOs, cryptids, or other anomalies resonate so powerfully, because they engage deeply ingrained cognitive frameworks, ethical intuitions, and aesthetic sensibilities. The narrative then moves to reflective and philosophical territory, considering the ways in which persistent anomalies challenge notions of objective reality, proof, and epistemic authority, and the narrator notes that the proof is out there consistently emphasizes a model of disciplined wonder, an approach that cultivates skepticism without cynicism, curiosity without credulity, and engagement without surrendering ethical responsibility. A particularly profound section examines absence, silence, and the missing elements of observation, moments where anticipated phenomena fail to manifest, and the narrator reflects on how these gaps shape expectation, influence memory, and generate a subtle form of mystery. Highlighting that uncertainty is not merely a lack of data but an active component of human perception and meaning-making, the narrative also revisits cross-generational and comparative cultural patterns, showing how myths, legends, and scientific investigation across centuries demonstrate striking thematic continuity, and the narrator observes that human engagement with the unexplained has always combined technical observation, narrative construction, and moral reflection, revealing continuity in both curiosity and interpretive practice. As Part 12 progresses, the focus turns inward, examining how sustained engagement with mystery transforms the observer, instilling epistemic humility, imaginative flexibility, and emotional resilience, and the narrator notes that these transformations may constitute the most enduring proof the series offers, not in validating a particular phenomenon, but in shaping how humans understand, relate to, and live alongside uncertainty. The narrative then synthesizes key themes: the interplay of evidence and perception, the ethical responsibilities of documentation and dissemination, the social and cognitive processes that shape belief, the role of technology in extending both observation and interpretive challenge, and the aesthetic and emotional resonance of wonder and fear. And the narrator observes how the proof is out there consistently integrates these dimensions into a coherent framework for engaging with the unknown. The final segments of Part 12 meditate on continuity, transformation, and the limits of knowledge, showing how the archive of reports, recordings, interviews, and analyses persists even as individual memory fades, technologies evolve, and communities change, and the narrator reflects on how mystery endures not because it is unsolvable, but because human perception, culture, and cognition are active participants in its manifestation. The chapter concludes with a philosophical and emotional synthesis. Mystery is not merely an external object to be documented or explained, but a relational phenomenon, emerging at the intersection of event, observer, interpretation, and context. And the narrator notes that the ultimate lesson of the proof is out there may be that human engagement with the unknown, guided by curiosity, rigor, empathy, and reflection, is as meaningful, transformative, and instructive as the resolution of any anomaly itself. He pauses to consider the future of inquiry, imagining increasingly sophisticated tools, evolving social and cultural frameworks, and deepening philosophical reflection, and he concludes that while the unknown will never be fully conquered, the disciplined, ethical, and imaginative engagement modeled by the series allows humanity to navigate uncertainty, cultivate understanding, and sustain wonder. The narrator closes the series with a quiet invitation to the audience to look at the world attentively, think critically, feel deeply, and embrace the coexistence of knowledge and mystery, understanding that the proof, while always out there, resides as much in the mind, perception, and ethical engagement of the observer as in any external phenomenon, leaving the viewer with both the awe of the unknown and the tools to live responsibly with it.